Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we open the pages of one of the most enchanting tales ever told. But before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from and what hour of the night finds you here. Our little circle now stretches across oceans, bound by stories and calm. So dim the lights, let the air grow still, and let your mind wander gently with me into tonight's story. The Ugly Duckling. It was lovely summer weather in the country, and the golden corn, the green oats, and the haystacks piled up. The meadows looked beautiful. The stork walking about on his long red legs chattered in the Egyptian language which he had learnt from his mother. The cornfields and meadows were surrounded by large forests, in the midst of which were deep pools. It was, indeed, delightful to walk about in the country. In a sunny spot stood a pleasant old farmhouse close by a deep river, and from the house down to the waterside grew great burdock leaves, as high that under the tallest of them a little child could stand upright. The spot was as wild as the center of a thick wood. In this snug retreat sat a duck on her nest, watching for her young brood to hatch. She was beginning to get tired of her task, for the little ones were a long time coming out of their shells, and she seldom had any visitors. The other ducks liked much better to swim about in the river than to climb the slippery banks and sit under a burdock leaf to have a gossip with her. At length one shell cracked, and then another, and from each egg came a living creature that lifted its head and cried, "Peep, peep." "Quack, quack," said the mother, and then they all quacked as well as they could, and looked about them on every side at the large green leaves. Their mother allowed them to look as much as they liked, because green is good for the eyes. "How large the world is," said the young ducks, when they found how much more room they now had than while they were inside the eggshell. "Do you imagine this is the whole world?" asked the mother. "Wait till you have seen the garden. It stretches far beyond that to the parson's field, but I have never ventured to such a distance. Are you all out?" she continued, rising. "No, I declare, the largest egg lies there still. I wonder how long this is to last. I am quite tired of it." And she seated herself again on the nest. "Well, how are you getting on?" asked an old duck who paid her a visit. "One egg is not hatched yet," said the duck. "It will not break, but just look at all the others. Are they not the prettiest little ducklings you ever saw? They are the image of their father, who is so unkind, he never comes to see." "Let me see the egg that will not break," said the duck. "I have no doubt it is a turkey's egg. I was persuaded to hatch some once, and after all my care and trouble with the young ones, they were afraid of the water. I quacked and clucked, but all to no purpose. I could not get them to venture in. Let me look at the egg. Yes, that is a turkey's egg. Take my advice, leave it where it is, and teach the other children to swim." "I think I will sit on it a little while longer," said the duck. "As I have sat so long already, a few days will be nothing." "Please yourself," said the old duck, and she went away. At last the large egg broke, and a young one crept forth, crying, "Peep, peep." It was very large and ugly. The duck stared at it and exclaimed, "It is very large and not at all like the others. I wonder if it really is a turkey. We shall soon find it out, however, when we go to the water. It must go in, if I have to push it myself." On the next day the weather was delightful, and the sun shone brightly on the green burdock leaves. So the mother duck took her young brood down to the water and jumped in with a splash. "Quack, quack," cried she, and one after another the little ducklings jumped in. The water closed over their heads, but they came up again in an instant and swam about quite prettily, with their legs paddling under them as easily as possible, and the ugly duckling was also in the water swimming with them. "Oh," said the mother, "that is not a turkey. How well he uses his legs, and how upright he holds himself. He is my own child, and he is not so very ugly after all if you look at him properly. Quack, quack, come with me now. I will take you into grand society and introduce you to the farmyard. But you must keep close to me, or you may be trodden upon. And above all, beware of the cat." When they reached the farmyard, there was a great disturbance. 2 families were fighting for an eel's head, which, after all, was carried off by the cat. "See, children, that is the way of the world," said the mother duck, wetting her beak, for she would have liked the eel's head herself. "Come now, use your legs, and let me see how well you can behave. You must bow your heads prettily to that old duck yonder. She is the highest born of them all, and has Spanish blood. Therefore, she is well off. Don't you see she has a red flag tied to her leg, which is something very grand, and a great honor for a duck? It shows that everyone is anxious not to lose her, as she can be recognized both by man and beast. Come, now, don't turn your toes. A well-bred duckling spreads his feet wide apart, just like his father and mother, in this way. Now bend your neck and say, 'Quack.'" The ducklings did as they were bid, but the other duck stared and said, "Look, here comes another brood, as if there were not enough of us already. And what a queer-looking object one of them is. We don't want him here." And then one flew out and bit him in the neck. "Let him alone," said the mother. "He is not doing any harm." "Yes, but he is so big and ugly," said the spiteful duck, "and therefore he must be turned out." "The others are very pretty children," said the old duck with the rag on her leg. "All but that one. I wish his mother could improve him a little." "That is impossible, your grace," replied the mother. "He is not pretty, but he has a very good disposition, and swims as well or even better than the others. I think he will grow up pretty, and perhaps be smaller. He has remained too long in the egg, and therefore his figure is not properly formed." And then she stroked his neck and smoothed the feathers, saying, "It is a drake, and therefore not of so much consequence. I think he will grow up strong and able to take care of himself." "The other ducklings are graceful enough," said the old duck. "Now make yourself at home, and if you can find an eel's head, you can bring it to me." And so they made themselves comfortable. But the poor duckling, who had crept out of his shell last of all, and looked so ugly, was bitten and pushed and made fun of, not only by the ducks, but by all the poultry. "He is too big," they all said, and the turkey cock, who had been born into the world with spurs and fancied himself really an emperor, puffed himself out like a vessel in full sail, and flew at the duckling, and became quite red in the head with passion, so that the poor little thing did not know where to go, and was quite miserable because he was so ugly, and laughed at by the whole farmyard. So it went on from day to day, till it got worse and worse. The poor duckling was driven about by everyone. Even his brothers and sisters were unkind to him, and would say, "Ah, you ugly creature, I wish the cat would get you." And his mother said she wished he had never been born. The ducks pecked him, the chickens beat him, and the girl who fed the poultry kicked him with her feet. so at last he ran away, frightening the little birds in the hedge as he flew over the palings. "They are afraid of me because I am ugly," he said. So he closed his eyes and flew still farther until he came out on a large moor inhabited by wild ducks. Here he remained the whole night, feeling very tired and sorrowful. In the morning, when the wild ducks rose in the air, they stared at their new comrade. "What sort of a duck are you?" they all said, coming round him. He bowed to them and was as polite as he could be, but he did not reply to their question. "You are exceedingly ugly," said the wild ducks, "but that will not matter if you do not want to marry one of our family." Poor thing, he had no thoughts of marriage. All he wanted was permission to lie among the rushes and drink some of the water on the moor. After he had been on the moor 2 days, there came 2 wild geese, or rather goslings, for they had not been out of the egg long and were very saucy. "Listen, friend," said one of them to the duckling, "you are so ugly that we like you very well. Will you go with us and become a bird of passage? Not far from here is another moor, in which there are some pretty wild geese, all unmarried. It is a chance for you to get a wife. You may be lucky, ugly as you are." Pop, pop sounded in the air, and the 2 wild geese fell dead among the rushes, and the water was tinged with blood. Pop, pop echoed far and wide in the distance, and whole flocks of wild geese rose up from the rushes. The sound continued from every direction, for the sportsmen surrounded the moor, and some were even seated on branches of trees overlooking the rushes. The blue smoke from the guns rose like clouds over the dark trees, and as it floated away across the water, a number of sporting dogs bounded in among the rushes, which bent beneath them wherever they went. How they terrified the poor duckling! He turned away his head to hide it under his wing, and at the same moment a large, terrible dog passed quite near him. His jaws were open, his tongue hung from his mouth, and his eyes glared fearfully. He thrust his nose close to the duckling, showing his sharp teeth, and then, splash, splash, he went into the water without touching him. "Oh," sighed the duckling, "how thankful I am for being so ugly. Even a dog will not bite me." And so he lay quite still, while the shot rattled through the rushes, and gun after gun was fired over him. It was late in the day before all became quiet, but even then the poor young thing did not dare to move. He waited quietly for several hours, and then, after looking carefully around him, hastened away from the moor as fast as he could. He ran over field and meadow till a storm arose, and he could hardly struggle against it. Towards evening, he reached a poor little cottage that seemed ready to fall, and only remained standing because it could not decide on which side to fall first. The storm continued so violent that the duckling could go no farther. He sat down by the cottage, and then he noticed that the door was not quite closed in consequence of one of the hinges having given way. There was therefore a narrow opening near the bottom, large enough for him to slip through, which he did very quietly, and got a shelter for the night. A woman, a tomcat, and a hen lived in this cottage. The tomcat, whom the mistress called "my little son," was a great favorite. He could raise his back and purr, and could even throw out sparks from his fur if it were stroked the wrong way. The hen had very short legs, so she was called Chickie Shortlegs. She laid good eggs, and her mistress loved her as if she had been her own child. In the morning, the strange visitor was discovered, and the tom cat began to purr, and the hen to cluck. "What is that noise about?" said the old woman, looking round the room, but her sight was not very good. Therefore, when she saw the duckling, she thought it must be a fat duck that had strayed from home. "Oh, what a prize!" she exclaimed. "I hope it is not a drake, for then I shall have some duck's eggs. I must wait and see." So the duckling was allowed to remain on trial for 3 weeks, but there were no eggs. Now the tomcat was the master of the house, and the hen was mistress, and they always said, "We and the world," for they believed themselves to be half the world, and the better half too. The duckling thought that others might hold a different opinion on the subject, but the hen would not listen to such doubts. "Can you lay eggs?" she asked. "No." "Then have the goodness to hold your tongue." "Can you raise your back, or purr, or throw out sparks?" said the tomcat. "No." "Then you have no right to express an opinion when sensible people are speaking." So the duckling sat in a corner, feeling very low-spirited, till the sunshine and the fresh air came into the room through the open door, and then he began to feel such a great longing for a swim on the water that he could not help telling the hen. "What an absurd idea," said the hen. "You have nothing else to do, therefore you have foolish fancies. If you could purr or lay eggs, they would pass away." "Oh, but it is so delightful to swim about on the water," said the duckling, "and so refreshing to feel it close over your head while you dive down to the bottom." "Delightful indeed," said the hen. "Why, you must be crazy. Ask the cat. He is the cleverest animal I know. Ask him how he would like to swim about on the water or to dive under it, for I will not speak of my own opinion. Ask our mistress, the old woman. There is no one in the world more clever than she is. Do you think she would like to swim or to let the water close over her head?" "You don't understand me," said the duckling. "We don't understand you. Who can understand you, I wonder? Do you consider yourself more clever than the cat or the old woman? I will say nothing of myself. Don't imagine such nonsense, child, and thank your good fortune that you have been received here. Are you not in a warm room, and in society from which you may learn something? But you are a chatterer, and your company is not very agreeable. Believe me, I speak only for your own good. I may tell you unpleasant truths, but that is a proof of my friendship. I advise you, therefore, to lay eggs and learn to purr as quickly as possible." "I believe I must go out into the world again," said the duckling. "Yes, do," said the hen. So the duckling left the cottage and soon found water on which it could swim and dive, but was avoided by all other animals because of its ugly appearance. Autumn came, and the leaves in the forest turned to orange and gold. Then, as winter approached, the wind caught them as they fell and whirled them in the cold air. The clouds, heavy with hail and snowflakes, hung low in the sky, and the raven stood on the ferns, crying, "Croak, croak." It made one shiver with cold to look at him. All this was very sad for the poor little duckling. One evening, just as the sun set amid radiant clouds, there came a large flock of beautiful birds out of the bushes. The duckling had never seen any like them before. They were swans, and they curved their graceful necks, while their soft plumage shone with dazzling whiteness. They uttered a singular cry as they spread their glorious wings and flew away from those cold regions to warmer countries across the sea. As they mounted higher and higher in the air, the ugly little duckling felt quite a strange sensation as he watched them. He whirled himself in the water like a wheel, stretched out his neck towards them, and uttered a cry so strange that it frightened himself. Could he ever forget those beautiful, happy birds? And when at last they were out of his sight, he dived under the water and rose again almost beside himself with excitement. He knew not the names of these birds, nor where they had flown, but he felt towards them as he had never felt for any other bird in the world. He was not envious of these beautiful creatures, but wished to be as lovely as they. Poor, ugly creature! How gladly he would have lived even with the ducks had they only given him encouragement. The winter grew colder and colder. He was obliged to swim about on the water to keep it from freezing. But every night the space on which he swam became smaller and smaller. At length it froze so hard that the ice in the water crackled as he moved, and the duckling had to paddle with his legs as well as he could to keep the space from closing up. He became exhausted at last, and lay still and helpless, frozen fast in the ice. Early in the morning, a peasant who was passing by saw what had happened. He broke the ice in pieces with his wooden shoe and carried the duckling home to his wife. The warmth revived the poor little creature, but when the children wanted to play with him, the duckling thought they would do him some harm. So he started up in terror, fluttered into the milk pan, and splashed the milk about the room. Then the woman clapped her hands, which frightened him still more. He flew first into the butter cask, then into the meal tub, and out again. What a condition he was in! The woman screamed and struck at him with the tongs. The children laughed and screamed and tumbled over each other in their efforts to catch him. But luckily he escaped. The door stood open. The poor creature could just manage to slip out among the bushes and lie down quite exhausted in the newly fallen snow. It would be very sad were I to relate all the misery and privations which the poor little duckling endured during the hard winter. But when it had passed, he found himself lying one morning in a moor amongst the rushes. He felt the warm sun shining and heard the lark singing and saw that all around was beautiful spring. Then the young bird felt that his wings were strong as he flapped them against his sides and rose high into the air. They bore him onwards until he found himself in a large garden before he well knew how it had happened. The apple trees were in full blossom, and the fragrant elders bent their long green branches down to the stream, which wound round a smooth lawn. Everything looked beautiful in the freshness of early spring. From a thicket close by came 3 beautiful white swans, rustling their feathers and swimming lightly over the smooth water. The duckling remembered the lovely birds and felt more strangely unhappy than ever. "I will fly to those royal birds," he exclaimed, "and they will kill me because I am so ugly and dare to approach them. But it does not matter. Better be killed by them than pecked by the ducks, beaten by the hens, pushed about by the maiden who feeds the poultry, or starved with hunger in the winter." Then he flew to the water and swam towards the beautiful swans. The moment they espied the stranger, they rushed to meet him with outstretched wings. "Kill me," said the poor bird, and he bent his head down to the surface of the water and awaited death. But what did he see in the clear stream below? His own image, no longer a dark, gray bird, ugly and disagreeable to look at, but a graceful and beautiful swan. To be born in a duck's nest in a farmyard is of no consequence to a bird if it is hatched from a swan's egg. He now felt glad at having suffered sorrow and trouble, because it enabled him to enjoy so much better all the pleasure and happiness around him. for the great swans swam round the newcomer and stroked his neck with their beaks as a welcome. Into the garden presently came some little children, and threw bread and cake into the water. "See," cried the youngest, "there is a new one." And the rest were delighted, and ran to their father and mother, dancing and clapping their hands, and shouting joyously, "There is another swan come, a new one has arrived." Then they threw more bread and cake into the water, and said, "The new one is the most beautiful of all. He is so young and pretty." And the old swans bowed their heads before him. Then he felt quite ashamed, and hid his head under his wing, for he did not know what to do. He was so happy, and yet not at all proud. He had been persecuted and despised for his ugliness, and now he heard them say he was the most beautiful of all the birds. Even the elder tree bent down its boughs into the water before him, and the sun shone warm and bright. Then he rustled his feathers, curved his slender neck, and cried joyfully from the depths of his heart, "I never dreamed of such happiness as this, while I was an ugly duckling." The last pearl. There once stood a great house filled with warmth and joy. Its walls glowed softly beneath the evening lamps, and every chamber echoed with the quiet laughter of contented hearts. The owners were happy, the servants cheerful, the friends rejoicing. For on that day a son and heir had been born. The mother rested peacefully, the child lay safe in her arms, and every soul under that roof breathed gratitude and delight. The small lamp in the mother's chamber had been dimmed, its shade half drawn, so the light fell only as a gentle glow. Heavy curtains of silken fabric, soft as moonlight, were pulled close before the windows. The thick carpet yielded beneath one's feet like moss in a quiet forest. All within the room whispered of calm and rest. Even the nurse, sitting beside the cradle, felt the peace that reigned there. Her eyes closed, and she too drifted into slumber. For all was well, and heaven's blessing had descended upon the home. At the head of the bed stood the guardian spirit of the house. Over the newborn child it bent, spreading a veil woven of glimmering starlight. The veil shimmered with countless pearls, and each pearl was a token of good fortune, health, happiness, beauty, love, and long life. Around the cradle, unseen by mortal eyes, the good fairies of life had gathered, whispering their blessings. The air was thick with promise, the silence radiant with invisible song. "All that the world can give has been granted here," murmured the guardian spirit, gazing in wonder at the sleeping child. But from beside the bed a soft voice answered, gentle yet solemn. It was the voice of the child's good angel. "No," said the angel, "not all. One fairy has not yet brought her gift. Her blessing is the last, and though she may tarry, she will come. The wreath of fortune is not yet complete. The final pearl is still missing." "Missing?" cried the guardian spirit. "Then we must not rest until we find it. Tell me who this fairy is, and I shall fly to her and beg for her gift." "She will come," replied the angel quietly. "Even if many years must pass, she will not forget. For without her, no life is truly crowned. Yet if you wish to seek her, I will guide you to where she may be found. She dwells nowhere and everywhere. She visits the palace of the king and the cottage of the poor. She enters uninvited, yet leaves behind a treasure more enduring than gold. She touches all lives, whether they welcome her or not. Then lead me," said the spirit. "Let us go to her and bring back the missing pearl." So the two, radiant and unseen, soared hand in hand through the night. They passed over glittering cities, over quiet villages and lonely fields, until at last they came to a great house, wrapped in silence. The halls were dark and echoing. The rooms stood empty. Only the long white curtains trembled softly in the wind that swept through open windows. In the middle of the wide chamber stood an open coffin. Within it lay a woman, still young, with beauty untouched by death. Fresh roses had been laid upon her breast, their fragrance mingling with the solemn stillness. Her hands, folded gently, seemed as if they might yet move to bless her children once more. Her face was calm and noble, lit with a quiet glory, the peace of one who had entered into the mysteries of God. Beside the coffin stood her husband and their children, a circle of grief. The father held the youngest child in his arms, while the older ones clung silently to his garments. He took the lifeless hand in his own, a hand once warm with love and labor, now cold and still, and pressed it to his lips. No word was spoken. Their sorrow was too deep for speech. Tears fell heavily onto the floor, echoing in the stillness like raindrops in a tomb. Then, with bowed heads and breaking hearts, they turned away and left her. A single candle burned beside the coffin. Its flame trembled in the draught, stretching upward like a thin red tongue that fought against the wind. Strangers entered then, solemn and silent men. They closed the lid, sealed the coffin with nails, and the sound of hammering rang through the desolate house, through every heart that loved her. The guardian spirit shuddered. "Why have you brought me here?" it asked. "Surely no fairy of blessing could dwell in such a place of death." The angel laid a gentle hand upon the spirit's arm and pointed toward a shadowed corner of the room. "She is here," said the angel, "here, in this sacred hour." The spirit turned and beheld a woman seated where once the mother had sat in life, among flowers, books, and pictures, where her laughter had filled the air. But this new figure was robed in garments heavy and dark, her face veiled, her hands folded upon her knees. Around her there was no light, only a trembling sorrow that seemed to breathe. It was sorrow herself. She had come to dwell where love had reigned, to rule where joy had once been queen. A single tear slid from her eyes and fell into her lap. There it hardened into a radiant pearl, glowing with the 7 colors of the rainbow. The angel caught it, and it shone like a star of many fires. "The pearl of sorrow," whispered the angel, holding it aloft, "is the last and greatest of all gifts. It completes the circle and binds the crown together. Without it, no life is whole, no heart is wise. Through it, all other blessings gain their depth and splendor, for only they who have wept may truly rejoice. Behold, it gleams with the colors of the rainbow, the bridge between earth and heaven. When one whom we love departs, the heart breaks, yet it also opens. In the place of each who is taken from us, there is given one friend more to await us in eternity. Thus even grief becomes grace, even loss becomes hope. Look upon this pearl, said the angel, and remember, within it are hidden the wings of the soul, the wings of Psyche, that bear us upward beyond the stars, away from pain, toward peace. And the guardian spirit bowed in reverence, for it understood that the pearl of sorrow was, indeed, the crowning jewel of all life's gifts. The Great Sea Serpent, far out beneath the wide blue ocean, where sunlight drifts like molten gold through the clear green depths, There once lived a very small sea fish of fine descent. What name it bore, I cannot recall. The learned naturalists may tell you, for they are well acquainted with such matters. But it was a delicate little creature, nimble of fin and quick of eye, belonging to an ancient and honorable family of the deep. It was not alone in the world. Indeed, it had no fewer than 1,800 brothers and sisters, all of them born at the same moment and of the same tiny size. None of them had ever known father or mother, for the sea keeps her secrets well. They were children of the vast element itself, and therefore they learned early to fend for themselves. Yet they did not grieve, for youth in the ocean is full of play, and the world is wide and shining. They darted here and there through the cool, transparent halls of their water kingdom, finding joy in movement itself, and drinking, if one may so call it, from the endless cup of the sea. Their food floated to them as if by miracle, invisible motes of life that the currents carried. And each little fish thought the ocean had been made especially for him. Not one of them reflected upon the meaning of existence. They were alive, and that was happiness enough. Above them the sun poured down its long golden lances into the depths, lighting the water until it shone like liquid crystal. Strange shapes drifted through that brightness, creatures of every pattern and proportion, some so enormous that the whole swarm of the little family might have vanished into a single gulp of their cavernous mouths. Yet none of the small fry trembled. Never had one among them been devoured, and youth, whether in air or water, cannot fear what it has not known. So they swam together in glad disorder, forming silver ribbons that wound and turned as prettily as the mackerel or the herring in their shimmering shoals. One quiet morning, when all 1,800 were gliding side by side in cheerful idleness, a sound like distant thunder came trembling through the waters above them. Down from the lighted surface sank something long, black, and heavy, a thing without end, it seemed, descending with such force that the very sea quivered. Where it struck, it crushed the little ones by the dozen, bending and twisting as it fell, stretching farther and farther until it seemed to have no limit at all. Panic seized the dwellers of the deep. Great fish and small fled in terror. The eels knotted themselves, the snails withdrew into their shells, the crabs scuttled backward into the sand. The monstrous shape sank lower and lower, coiling itself through the dim green twilight until it rested at last upon the bottom. None had ever seen its like. It looked to them as if some endless sea serpent, black as night, had suddenly fallen from the sky. And what was it, truly? We, who live on the dry land and read our newspapers, can answer. It was no serpent of fable, but the great telegraph cable that men were laying between Europe and America. Yet the ocean folk knew nothing of that. Among them there was fear and confusion, such as the sea had not known since Noah's flood. The flying fish burst through the surface into the air, glittering like silver arrows in the sunlight. The blowfish darted away with the speed of a cannonball, puffing himself in fright. The shy ones sought refuge in the deep mud, reaching the bottom long before. The cable touched it. Cod and flounder, who lived in quiet content down there, were startled out of their calm, while starfish, in their terror, turned their stomachs inside out, a trick which, fortunately, costs them no life. Lobsters left their shells behind. Crabs dropped their claws in their haste. It was chaos without end. When peace at last began to return, The 1,800 young ones were scattered far and wide. Never again would most of them meet, nor even know of each other's existence. Only 10 had kept together, and when the first trembling hours were past, curiosity awoke in them. They peered this way and that. They looked upward to the glittering roof of the sea, and downward to the dim green floor. And there below, stretching as far as their eyes could see, they glimpsed the dreadful stranger, lying motionless. That thing which had frightened every creature from the whale to the worm. It seemed thin, almost harmless, but who could tell how mighty it might become when stirred? So they kept their distance. "Let it lie where it lies," said the most cautious of them. "It concerns us not." But one, the smallest and perhaps the wisest, felt the old itch of wonder. "It came from above," he said, "and above one must go to learn its secret." So he swam upward alone through widening rings of light until he reached the calm surface, where the sea lies like a mirror under the sky. There he met a dolphin, that merry acrobat of the waves who somersaults for sheer pleasure. Surely such a one must know what had happened, for his eyes are quick and he travels far. Yet the dolphin only shook the water from his back, looked pleased with himself, and said nothing, for he had been thinking of his own leaps, not of what had fallen. Vanity keeps many a creature ignorant. Then the little fish turned to a seal, who had just ducked down from a rock above. The seal, though fond of small fishes, was in good humor and polite, having lately dined. "Ah, yes," said he, "I know somewhat of that matter. Many a night have I lain on the shore, watching the doings of those cunning beings men call humans. They have strange ways. They weave traps for us and send ships across the sea, full of thunder and smoke. Of late, they have been busy with a long creature of their own making, the one you saw. They dragged him out from their land, coiled him like a snake, and laid him on their ships to bear him over the waves. I saw them struggle, for he was heavy and restless, yet they mastered him at last and sank him into the sea. There he lies now, resting his tired length along the bottom. Mark me, he will grow fat again in time, and then woe to us all. For I think he is none other than the Great Sea Serpent of which men have spoken in fear since the world was young. And with a satisfied snort, the seal dove away. How much he knows, said the little fish in awe. But I wonder if it is all true. We shall never find out, replied the others, and turned their tails. I shall, said the smallest. And down he plunged into the great green stillness once more. He swam long and far. The farther he went, the vaster the world seemed. Shoals of herring glimmered like sheets of moving silver. Mackerel flashed blue and green, as if each bore a spark of the sky upon its side. Jellyfish floated like trembling flowers of glass. Forests of seaweed waved gently in the tide. At last, in the deep shadow where no sunlight reached, he saw what seemed a long black ribbon. But when he drew near, he found it was not the cable, but the broken hull of a great ship that had sunk long ago. Within its shattered ribs he saw two pale shapes, a woman with her child clasped in her arms, drifting as if asleep. A tender fear seized the little fish. He did not know that they would never wake. Seaweed hung above them like garlands, and all was silent as a churchyard. Trembling, he fled from that mournful place. Not far away he met a whale, a young one, yet vast as a mountain beside him. "Do not swallow me," cried the little fish. "I am smaller than a crumb, and take delight in life. What brings such a speck to this depth? Asked the whale, and so the fish told his tale. Ho, ho, laughed the giant, sending up a fountain as he rose for breath. So that was what tickled my back the other day. I thought it a mast. Well, I shall go and see. Follow if you dare. So they went, though the small one kept well behind, for the wake of a whale is like a tempest. They met a shark and an old sawfish on the way, both eager to behold the new monster. Then came a catfish boasting of his strength. If it be no thicker than a cable, I shall bite it in two, he bragged, showing his 6 rows of teeth. Presently the whale cried, There it lies. But it was only a giant eel. If the stranger be longer than I, said the eel darkly, there will be trouble. Indeed there will, said the shark, and on they all swam. Soon a shadow loomed before them, an ancient whale, so overgrown with weeds and shells that he looked like a floating island. Come with us, they called. A new creature has come to dwell in our sea. But the old one sighed. Leave me be. I am sick. Birds peck at my back. I carry their bones as trophies. Let me rest. Sickness, scoffed the shark. No fish is sick. You are wrong, groaned the old one. The eel has sores, the carp has smallpox, and we all have worms. But none cared to listen. Curiosity drew them on. At last they reached the resting place of the telegraph cable. There it lay, stretched across valleys and reefs, beneath coral forests and fields of sand, joining 2 worlds. Over it swept the currents, around it swarmed the life of the sea. Worms crept, sponges grew, strange blue creatures nibbled at it. Yet through that silent body passed the thoughts of men, messages flying swifter than the wings of light itself. What manner of beast is this? Murmured the fishes. The shark threatened it with his teeth. The swordfish brandished his saw. The polyp groped it with soft arms. It has no scales, said he. It bears no young. It is longer than I, cried the eel, but less supple. The whale demanded speech of it, but the cable answered not, for its voice was elsewhere, above, between continents, whispering human words through the dark. Then the shark, in wrath, rushed forward, and the swordfish, in his excitement, stabbed the shark himself. There was a whirl of mud and fins, a biting and brawling of monsters. The cable lay unmoved, fulfilling its quiet duty, as wise beings do. Night fell, but the sea was bright with its 1,000,000 lamps, the tiny glowing creatures that light the deep. And still the question passed from mouth to mouth. What is it? What is it not? Then came a sea cow, ancient and solemn, draped in seaweed like a queen. Listen to me, she said. All that falls from above is dead. That thing is but a toy of men, a trap, perhaps. Let it rot. Everything from the upper world turns to dust. The others agreed at once, for it is easy to follow those who speak loudly. Only the little fish thought differently. Perhaps, he whispered, it is the most wonderful creature of all, and we, who know the truth, may say he was not so far wrong. For that long black serpent of the sea, born not of flesh but of thought, is indeed the marvel of our age, the Midgard snake of the modern world, encircling the earth with living messages, binding nation to nation in the twinkling of an eye. Through it flow both wisdom and folly, kindness and deceit, good and evil alike, for such is the nature of all human things. Deep below the storms, amid coral gardens and drowned ships, it rests, silent, tireless, and alive with the restless spirit of mankind. Children's Prattle, There was once a grand party held at the home of a prosperous merchant. A splendid evening meant entirely for children. The merchant's spacious rooms glowed with lamplight and laughter. Garlands of evergreen and colored ribbons hung from the chandeliers, and the air smelled of vanilla cakes, candied fruit, and polished wood. In every corner, bright eyes sparkled, and small feet pattered across the floor. They were all the sons and daughters of people of standing, wealthy men, titled officers, and those whose names were printed in the newspapers. The host himself, the merchant, was a man of learning and success. His late father had been nothing more than a humble cattle dealer, yet an honest and prudent one, whose thrift and diligence had built the foundation for his son's fortune. The father had insisted that his boy should go to college and learn what books could teach, and the son, once grown, multiplied his inheritance by wit and enterprise. Now he was known not only for his riches, but also for his intelligence, and, truth be told, for his kindness too, though people tended to talk more about his money than his heart. His house was famous for its constant guests, some with noble ancestry, some with quick minds, some with both, and a few with neither, but all eager to bask in his hospitality. On this night, however, the tables were cleared for a smaller, purer company, children only, with their candor and chatter, which, unlike grown-up conversation, always reveals exactly what they think. Among the guests was a lovely little girl dressed in blue satin, with a string of imitation pearls around her neck. She was very proud, absurdly so, for she often told the others that her father was a groom of the bedchamber. The poor child had learned this arrogance not from her sensible parents, but from the household servants, who liked to boast of such things when polishing the silver. "I am a child of the chamber," she announced, holding her head high. She might as well have said she was a child of the cellar, for no one chooses the place of their birth. Still, she spoke as if that single fact of her father's position placed her among royalty itself. She began explaining to the other children what birth truly meant. "If one has it," she declared gravely, "then one has everything. But if one is born without it, there's no possible way to gain it later. You may study all you wish and work your fingers raw. It is useless. Without birth, you remain common forever." Then she added with a delicate little frown, "And as for people whose names end with sen, why, they'll never amount to anything at all. You must stretch your arms like this." And she flung out her slender arms, elbows turned outward, to keep them at a proper distance. Her movements were graceful, her face as pretty as porcelain, and she looked so innocent while saying it that one could almost forgive her pride. Sweet child, indeed. But the merchant's own little daughter flushed red with anger, for her father's name was Madsen, and she knew perfectly well that it ended in sen. "My father," she cried, lifting her chin, "can buy $100 worth of sugar candy and throw it away if he wishes. Can your father do that?" It was a bold answer, born of wounded pride, yet very human and very childish. Before anyone could reply, another girl, the daughter of a newspaper writer, spoke up proudly. "My father," she said, "can put your father and her father and everybody else's father into the paper. My mother says people are afraid of him because he owns the paper." And she marched across the room with tiny, self-important steps, like a princess who believes the world is hers. Meanwhile, in the hallway outside, a poor boy stood peeking through the half-open door. He was barefoot, His clothes smelled faintly of the kitchen fire, and his hands were still greasy from turning the roast spit. The cook had let him rest a moment, and, as a special treat, allowed him to look in on the party. To him, the sight of all those bright lights and well-dressed children seemed like a glimpse of heaven. He pressed his nose against the crack in the door and whispered to himself, "If only I could be one of them." Then he listened, and what he heard made his small heart ache. He heard the words birth and blood and name. He heard laughter when someone mentioned the poor and those with sen at the end of their names. His father had no savings, no books, and certainly no newspaper. There were days when there wasn't enough bread for supper. And worst of all, his own name ended with sen. That, it seemed, was a curse he would never escape. He stood very still, feeling smaller than ever, until a thought, simple and brave, crossed his mind. Still, I was born, just like them, the same way. God made me too. And with that quiet comfort, he went back to the kitchen, where the cook gave him a crust of cake and a kind smile. That was many years ago. Children, as you know, do not stay children long. The world turns, and time teaches more than 1,000 books. Decades passed, and the little ones of that evening each walked a different path. The proud girl in blue satin grew into a fine lady who learned that a title cannot protect a heart from sorrow. The writer's daughter discovered that fame fades faster than ink, and that a newspaper cannot buy happiness. The merchant's little girl became gentle and wise. Wealth no longer dazzled her, for she had seen how easily it may vanish. As for the boy in the kitchen, well, he carried his hunger, his patience, and his dreams into the wide world. He worked with his hands, shaping clay and stone. He learned to see beauty where others saw nothing but roughness. When he was tired, he thought of the warm light spilling from that distant room and the laughter that had once excluded him. He let the memory drive him, not to bitterness, but to creation. And so the poor boy with the sen at the end of his name became the man whose art made nations proud. Thorvaldsen. Now there stood in the city a splendid house filled with statues, marble figures, and delicate carvings that seemed almost alive. People came from every land to see them. They whispered his name with admiration, though many did not realize it was the same name that once caused him shame. His work adorned palaces and churches, and even kings spoke of him with respect. And the other children of that long-ago evening, they too grew into decent, thoughtful people. Time had polished away the foolish pride of youth. They met again, perhaps, at one of Thorvaldsen's grand exhibitions, and looked at one another with gentle amusement, remembering what they had said about birth and names so many years before. They had all learned what every heart must learn in time, that true worth is not in titles or endings of words, but in deeds, in kindness, and in the labor of the spirit. Thus ended the story of the children at the merchant's house, a tale begun in vanity and finished in grace. For what had once been childish boasting became, through the years, the quiet wisdom of grown souls. And as for that little boy who had stood at the door, unnoticed and forgotten, he had opened for all the world a greater door, the one that leads from humble beginnings to immortal art. A string of pearls. The railroad in Denmark still extends only from Copenhagen to Korsør. It is a string of pearls. Europe has a wealth of these pearls. Its most costly are named Paris, London, Vienna, Naples. And yet many a man will point out as his favorite pearl not one of these great cities, but rather some little country town that is still the home of homes to him, the home of those dearest to him. Yes, often it is not a town at all, but a single homestead, a little house hidden among green hedges, a place hardly visible as the train speeds by. How many pearls are there on the line from Copenhagen to Korsør? We will consider just 6, which most people must notice. Old memories and poetry itself give a luster to these pearls, so that they shine in our thoughts. Near the hill where stands the palace of Frederick VI, the home of Oehlenschläger's childhood, one of these pearls glistens, sheltered by Søndermarken's woody ground. It used to be called the cottage of Philemon and Baucis. Here lived Rabeck and his wife, Kama. Here, under their hospitable roof, assembled many of the generation's finest intellects from busy Copenhagen. It was the festival home of the intellectual. Now, don't say, "Ah, what a change." No, it is still the home of the intellect, a conservatory for sick plants, for buds which do not have the strength to unfold their true beauty of color and form, or show the blossoming and fruit-bearing which is hidden within them. The insane asylum, surrounded by human love, is truly a spot of holiness, a hospital for the sick plants that shall someday be transplanted to bloom in the paradise of God. The weakest minds are assembled now here, where once the strongest and keenest met to exchange thoughts and ideas, but still the flame of generosity mounts heavenward from the cottage of Philemon and Baucis. Ancient Roskilde, the burial town of kings by Hroar's spring, now lies before us. The slender towers of the church lift up above the low town and mirror themselves in Isefjord. Only one grave shall we seek here. It is not that of the mighty Queen Margrethe. No, within the white-walled churchyard which we speed close by is the grave, and over it lays a small, plain stone. The master of the organ, the reviver of the old Danish romances, rests here. We recall, the clear waves rolled, and there dwelt a king in Lera. Roskilde, burial place of kings. In your pearl, we see the insignificant gravestone whereon is cut a lyre and the name Vise. Now we reach Sigersted, near the town of Ringsted. The bed of the river is low here. Yellow corn waves over the spot where Hagbarth's boat lay at anchor, not far from Sina's maiden bower. Who does not know the legend of Hagbarth, who was hanged on the oak tree while the bower of Signa burst into flames? Who can forget that legend of immortal love? Beautiful sorrow, encircled by woods. Your quiet old cloistered town peeps out through its mossy trees. The keen eyes of youth from the academy can look across the lake toward the world's highway and hear the roar of the locomotive's dragon as it speeds through the woods. Sorrow, pearl of poetry, you are guarding the dust of Holberg. Your palace of learning stands beside the deep woodland lake like a great white swan. And nearby, like the bright star-flower of the woods, there gleams a tiny cottage whence pious hymns echo throughout the land. Words are spoken within, and the peasant listens and learns of Denmark's bygone days. As the song of the bird is to the greenwood, so is Ingemann to sorrow. On to the town of Slagelse. What is mirrored here in this pearl's luster? Gone forever is the cloister of Antorskov, N.B. Antvorskov. Vanished are the rich halls of the castle, even the last remaining wing. Yet one relic of olden times still lingers here, the wooden cross on the hill. It has been repaired again and again, for it marks the spot where, legend tells us, Saint Anders, holy priest of Slegelse, awoke, after having been brought there from Jerusalem in a single night. Korsør, birthplace of Baggeson, master of words and wit. The ruined old ramparts of the fallen fortress are now the last visible witness of your childhood home. Their lengthening sunset shadows point to the spot where stood the house in which you were born. From these hills you looked toward Sprogo and sang in undying verse. Nowhere have roses so red a hue, and nowhere are feathers so light and so blue, nowhere the thorns so daintily grown, as those to childhood innocence known. Humorous, charming singer, we shall weave for thee a garland of woodbine and fling it into the lake, so that the current may bear it to the coast of Kielerfjord, where your ashes rest. The tide shall bring you a greeting from the new generation, a greeting from your birthplace, Korsør, where I drop my string of pearls. That's quite right. A string of pearls does stretch from Copenhagen to Korsør, said grandmother when she had heard this read aloud. It's a string of pearls for me now, as it was more than 40 years ago. We had no railroad then. We spent days on a trip that can now be made in as many hours. That was in 1815, and I was 21. That is a charming age. Although to be up in the 60s, that is also a wonderful age. In my young days, it was a much rarer event than it is now to come to Copenhagen, which we considered the town of all towns. My parents hadn't visited it for 20 years, but at last they were going, and I was going with them. We had talked about that journey for years before, and now it was actually coming true. It seemed as though a new life were beginning for me. And really, in a way, a new life did begin for me. There was such a bustle of sewing and packing, and when at last we were ready to start, such a crowd of friends came to bid us farewell. It was a long journey we had ahead of us. Shortly before noon, we drove out of Odense in my parents' Holstein carriage, and our friends waved to us from the windows all the way down the street, till we passed through St. Jürgen's Gate. The weather was beautiful, the birds sang, and everything was joyful. We forgot what a long and tiresome road it was to Nyborg. We reached it toward evening, but the little sailing vessel had to wait for the mail, which didn't arrive until night. Then we got on board, and as far as we could see, the wide, smooth waters lay before us. We lay down and went to sleep in our clothes. When I awoke and came on deck next morning, I could see nothing at all. A heavy fog covered everything. When I heard the cocks crowing, I knew it must be sunrise. Bells were ringing, but I didn't know where. Then the mist lifted, and we found we were still lying very close to Nyborg. Later in the day, a wind came up, but it was against us. We tacked back and forth, and at last were lucky enough to reach Korsør by a little past 11 that night, having spent 22 hours to go 16 miles. It was good to get ashore, but it was dark. The lamps were weak, and it all seemed very strange to me, who had never been in any other town but Odense. "Look," said my father, "Baggeson was born there, and Birkner lived in that house." When I heard that, somehow the dark old town with its narrow little streets seemed to grow larger and brighter, and we were so glad to feel solid earth under our feet. There was no sleep for me that night, for I was so excited over all that I had seen and heard since I had left home the day before. Next morning we had to leave early. There was a terrible road ahead of us, with great bumps and holes as far as Slegelse, and not much better from there on. and we wanted to get to the Crab Inn early, so that on the same day we could reach Soro and visit the Muller's Emil, as we called him then. Yes, he was your grandfather, my late husband, the dean. He was a student at Soro then, and had just passed his second examination. That afternoon we reached the Crab Inn, which was a gallant place at that time, the very best inn on the whole trip, with the prettiest country around it. Yes, but you must all admit that it still is. Madame Plambeck was an industrious hostess, and everything in her house was as smoothly scoured as a larding board. On the wall they had, framed under glass, Bagason's letter to her. It was indeed worth seeing, and I greatly enjoyed looking at it. Then he went to Soro and found Emil there. You can imagine how glad we were to see him, and he to see us. He was so thoughtful and charming. He took us to see the church and the graves of Absalon and Holberg. He inspected the old monkish inscriptions with us and sailed with us across the lake to Parnasset. It was the most wonderful evening I remember. I was thinking that to become a poet, one had only to come to Soro and meditate among those lovely, peaceful scenes. By moonlight, we followed the Philosopher's Walk, as it's called, the wonderful and lonely little path beside the lake that joins the highway near the Crab Inn. Emil stayed for supper with us, and my father and my mother declared he had grown so sensible and looked so well. It was almost Whitsuntide, and he promised that in a few days he would be in Copenhagen to join us and his family. Ah, those few hours in Soro and at the Crab Inn I count among the choicest pearls of my life. Next morning we again started very early, for we had a long trip to Roskilde, where we wanted to see the church, and Father wanted to visit an old school friend that evening. We spent that night in Roskilde and reached Copenhagen by noon the next day. So we had spent about 3 days on a journey that can now be made in 3 hours, Korsør to Copenhagen. The pearls on that way have not grown more costly, that could never be, but the string is new and wonderful. I stayed with my parents in Copenhagen for 3 weeks. Emil was with us for 18 whole days, and when we returned to Funen, he went with us as far as Korsør. There, before we parted, we were betrothed. So it is no wonder I should call the road from Copenhagen to Korsør a string of pearls. Afterwards, when Emil received his post at Assens, we were married. We often talked about that journey to Copenhagen and intended doing it again. But then your mother came along, and after her came her brothers and sisters, and with all of them there was so much to do and take care of. Then your grandfather was promoted and made a dean. Yes, everything was happiness and joy, but we never got to Copenhagen again. No, I have never been there since, though we often thought and talked about it. Now I'm much too old to travel by rail, but still I'm right glad there is a railway. It's a real blessing, because it brings you young ones to me more quickly. Nowadays, Odense is hardly farther from Copenhagen than in my youth it was from Nyborg. You can speed to Italy in the time it took us to reach Copenhagen. Yes, that is certainly something. It doesn't matter that I just sit here always. Let the others travel, so long as they sometimes travel to me. And you needn't laugh at me, you young people, for sitting so still here day after day. I have really a wonderful journey ahead of me. I shall soon have to travel at a speed far greater than the railways. For when our Lord calls me, I shall go to join your grandfather. And when you have completed your work on this dear earth, you too will join us. And then, if we talk over the days of our mortal life, Believe me, dear children, I shall say then as I do now. From Copenhagen to Korsør is a perfect string of pearls. The bottleneck. Close to the corner of a street, among other abodes of poverty, stood an exceedingly tall, narrow house, which had been so knocked about by time that it seemed out of joint in every direction. This house was inhabited by poor people, but the deepest poverty was apparent in the garret lodging in the gable. In front of the little window, an old bent bird cage hung in the sunshine, which had not even a proper water glass, but instead of it the broken neck of a bottle turned upside down, and a cork stuck in to make it hold the water with which it was filled. An old maid stood at the window. She had hung chickweed over the cage, and the little linnet which it contained hopped from perch to perch, and sang and twittered merrily. "Yes, it's all very well for you to sing," said the bottleneck. That is, he did not really speak the words as we do, for the neck of a bottle cannot speak, but he thought them to himself in his own mind, just as people sometimes talk quietly to themselves. "Yes, you may sing very well. You have all your limbs uninjured. You should feel what it is like to lose your body and only have a neck and a mouth left, with a cork stuck in it, as I have. You wouldn't sing then, I know. After all, it is just as well that there are some who can be happy. I have no reason to sing, nor could I sing now if I were ever so happy. But when I was a whole bottle, and they rubbed me with a cork, didn't I sing then? I used to be called a complete lark. I remember when I went out to a picnic with the furrier's family on the day his daughter was betrothed. It seems as if it only happened yesterday. I have gone through a great deal in my time when I come to recollect. I have been in the fire and in the water. I have been deep in the earth and have mounted higher in the air than most other people. And now I am swinging here, outside a bird cage, in the air and the sunshine. Oh, indeed, it would be worthwhile to hear my history, but I do not speak it aloud, for a good reason, because I cannot." Then the bottleneck related his history, which was really rather remarkable. He, in fact, related it to himself, or at least thought it in his own mind. The little bird sang his own song merrily. In the street below, there was driving and running to and fro. Everyone thought of his own affairs, or perhaps of nothing at all. But the bottleneck thought deeply. He thought of the blazing furnace in the factory, where he had been blown into life. He remembered how hot it felt when he was placed in the heated oven, the home from which he sprang, and that he had a strong inclination to leap out again directly. But after a while, it became cooler, and he found himself very comfortable. He had been placed in a row, with a whole regiment of his brothers and sisters, all brought out of the same furnace. Some of them had certainly been blown into champagne bottles, and others into beer bottles, which made a little difference between them. In the world it often happens that a beer bottle may contain the most precious wine, and a champagne bottle be filled with blacking, but even in decay it may always be seen whether a man has been well born. Nobility remains noble, as a champagne bottle remains the same, even with blacking in its interior. When the bottles were packed, our bottle was packed amongst them. It little expected then to finish its career as a bottleneck, or to be used as a water glass to a bird's cage, which is, after all, a place of honor, for it is to be of some use in the world. The bottle did not behold the light of day again until it was unpacked with the rest in the wine merchant's cellar, and for the first time rinsed with water, which caused some very curious sensations. There it lay empty, and without a cork, and it had a peculiar feeling, as if it wanted something it knew not what. At last it was filled with rich and costly wine. A cork was placed in it, and sealed down. Then it was labeled First Quality, as if it had carried off the first prize at an examination. Besides, the wine and the bottle were both good, and while we are young is the time for poetry. There were sounds of song within the bottle, of things it could not understand, of green, sunny mountains, where the vines grow, and where the merry vine-dressers laugh, sing, and are merry. Ah, how beautiful is life! All these tones of joy and song in the bottle were like the working of a young poet's brain, who often knows not the meaning of the tones which are sounding within him. One morning, the bottle found a purchaser in the furrier's apprentice, who was told to bring one of the best bottles of wine. It was placed in the provision basket with ham and cheese and sausages. The sweetest fresh butter and the finest bread were put into the basket by the furrier's daughter herself, for she packed it. She was young and pretty. Her brown eyes laughed, and a smile lingered round her mouth as sweet as that in her eyes. She had delicate hands, beautifully white, and her neck was whiter still. It could easily be seen that she was a very lovely girl, and as yet she was not engaged. The provision basket lay in the lap of the young girl as the family drove out to the forest, and the neck of the bottle peeped out from between the folds of the white napkin. There was the red wax on the cork, and the bottle looked straight at the young girl's face, and also at the face of the young sailor who sat near her. He was a young friend, the son of a portrait painter. He had lately passed his examination with honor as mate, and the next morning he was to sail in his ship to a distant coast. There had been a great deal of talk on this subject while the basket was being packed, and during this conversation the eyes and the mouth of the furrier's daughter did not wear a very joyful expression. The young people wandered away into the green wood and talked together. What did they talk about? The bottle could not say, for he was in the provision basket. It remained there a long time, but when at last it was brought forth, it appeared as if something pleasant had happened, for everyone was laughing. The furrier's daughter laughed too, but she said very little, and her cheeks were like two roses. Then her father took the bottle and the corkscrew into his hands. What a strange sensation it was to have the cork drawn for the first time. The bottle could never after that forget the performance of that moment. Indeed, there was quite a convulsion within him as the cork flew out, and a gurgling sound as the wine was poured forth into the glasses. "Long life to the betrothed," cried the papa, and every glass was emptied to the dregs, while the young sailor kissed his beautiful bride. "Happiness and blessing to you both," said the old people father and mother, and the young man filled the glasses again. "Safe return and a wedding this day next year," he cried, and when the glasses were empty, he took the bottle, raised it on high, and said, "Thou hast been present here on the happiest day of my life. Thou shalt never be used by others." So saying, he hurled it high in the air. The furrier's daughter thought she should never see it again, but she was mistaken. It fell among the rushes on the borders of a little woodland lake. The bottle neck remembered well how long it lay there unseen. "I gave them wine, and they gave me muddy water," he had said to himself. "But I suppose it was all well meant. He could no longer see the betrothed couple, nor the cheerful old people, but for a long time he could hear them rejoicing and singing. At length there came by 2 peasant boys, who peeped in among the reeds and spied out the bottle. Then they took it up and carried it home with them, so that once more it was provided for. At home, in their wooden cottage, these boys had an elder brother, a sailor, who was about to start on a long voyage. He had been there the day before to say farewell, and his mother was now very busy packing up various things for him to take with him on his voyage. In the evening, his father was going to carry the parcel to the town to see his son once more and take him a farewell greeting from his mother. A small bottle had already been filled with herb tea mixed with brandy and wrapped in a parcel. But when the boys came in, they brought with them a larger and stronger bottle, which they had found. This bottle would hold so much more than the little one, and they all said the brandy would be so good for complaints of the stomach, especially as it was mixed with medical herbs. The liquid which they now poured into the bottle was not like the red wine with which it had once been filled. These were bitter drops, but they are of great use sometimes. For the stomach, the new large bottle was to go, not the little one. So the bottle once more started on its travels. It was taken on board, for Peter Jensen was one of the crew, the very same ship in which the young mate was to sail. But the mate did not see the bottle. Indeed, if he had, he would not have known it, or supposed it was the one out of which they had drunk to the felicity of the betrothed, and to the prospect of a marriage on his own happy return. Certainly the bottle no longer poured forth wine, but it contained something quite as good. And so it happened that whenever Peter Jensen brought it out, his messmates gave it the name of the apothecary, for it contained the best medicine to cure the stomach, and he gave it out quite willingly as long as a drop remained. Those were happy days, and the bottle would sing when rubbed with a cork, and it was called a great lark, Peter Jensen's lark. Long days and months rolled by, during which the bottle stood empty in a corner when a storm arose. Whether on the passage out or home, it could not tell, for it had never been ashore. It was a terrible storm. Great waves arose, darkly heaving and tossing the vessel to and fro. The main mast was split asunder, the ship sprang a leak, and the pumps became useless, while all around was black as night. At the last moment, when the ship was sinking, the young mate wrote on a piece of paper, "We are going down. God's will be done." Then he wrote the name of his betrothed, his own name, and that of the ship. Then he put the leaf in an empty bottle that happened to be at hand, corked it down tightly, and threw it into the foaming sea. He knew not that it was the very same bottle from which the goblet of joy and hope had once been filled for him, and now it was tossing on the waves with his last greeting and a message from the dead. The ship sank, and the crew sank with her, but the bottle flew on like a bird, for it bore within it a loving letter from a loving heart. And as the sun rose and set, the bottle felt as at the time of its first existence, when in the heated, glowing stove it had a longing to fly away. It outlived the storms and the calm. It struck against no rocks, was not devoured by sharks, but drifted on for more than a year, sometimes towards the north, sometimes towards the south, just as the current carried it. It was in all other ways its own master, but even of that one may get tired. The written leaf, the last farewell of the bridegroom to his bride, would only bring sorrow when once it reached her hands. But where were those hands? so soft and delicate, which had once spread the tablecloth on the fresh grass in the green wood on the day of her betrothal. Ah, yes, where was the furrier's daughter, and where was the land which might lie nearest to her home? The bottle knew not. It traveled onward, and at last all this wandering about became wearisome. At all events, it was not its usual occupation, but it had to travel, till at length it reached land. A foreign country. Not a word spoken in this country could the bottle understand. It was a language it had never before heard, and it is a great loss not to be able to understand a language. The bottle was fished out of the water and examined on all sides. The little letter contained within it was discovered, taken out, and turned and twisted in every direction. But the people could not understand what was written upon it. They could be quite sure that the bottle had been thrown overboard from a vessel, and that something about it was written on this paper. But what was written? That was the question. So the paper was put back into the bottle, and then both were put away in a large cupboard of one of the great houses of the town. Whenever any strangers arrived, the paper was taken out and turned over and over, so that the address, which was only written in pencil, became almost illegible, and at last no one could distinguish any letters on it at all. For a whole year the bottle remained standing in the cupboard, and then it was taken up to the loft, where it soon became covered with dust and cobwebs. Ah, how often then it thought of those better days, of the times when in the fresh, green wood it had poured forth rich wine, or while rocked by the swelling waves, it had carried in its bosom a secret, a letter, a last parting sigh. For full 20 years it stood in the loft, and it might have stayed there longer, but that the house was going to be rebuilt. The bottle was discovered when the roof was taken off. They talked about it, but the bottle did not understand what they said. A language is not to be learnt by living in a loft, even for 20 years. If I had been downstairs in the room, thought the bottle, I might have learnt it. It was now washed and rinsed, which process was really quite necessary, and afterwards it looked clean and transparent, and felt young again in its old age. But the paper which it had carried so faithfully was destroyed in the washing. They filled the bottle with seeds, though it scarcely knew what had been placed in it. Then they corked it down tightly and carefully wrapped it up. There not even the light of a torch or lantern could reach it, much less the brightness of the sun or moon. And yet, thought the bottle, men go on a journey that they may see as much as possible, and I can see nothing. However, it did something quite as important. It traveled to the place of its destination and was unpacked. "What trouble they have taken with that bottle over yonder," said one, "and very likely it is broken after all." But the bottle was not broken, and better still, it understood every word that was said. This language it had heard at the furnaces and at the wine merchants, in the forest and on the ship. It was the only good old language it could understand. It had returned home, and the language was as a welcome greeting. For very joy, it felt ready to jump out of people's hands, and scarcely noticed that its cork had been drawn, and its contents emptied out, till it found itself carried to a cellar, to be left there and forgotten. There's no place like home, even if it's a cellar. It never occurred to him to think that he might lie there for years. He felt so comfortable. For many long years he remained in the cellar, till at last some people came to carry away the bottles, and ours amongst the number. Out in the garden there was a great festival. Brilliant lamps hung in festoons from tree to tree, and paper lanterns through which the light shone till they looked like transparent tulips. It was a beautiful evening, and the weather mild and clear. The stars twinkled, and the new moon, in the form of a crescent, was surrounded by the shadowy disk of the whole moon, and looked like a gray globe with a golden rim. It was a beautiful sight for those who had good eyes. The illumination extended even to the most retired of the garden walks, at least not so retired that anyone need lose himself there. In the borders were placed bottles, each containing a light, and among them the bottle with which we are acquainted, and whose fate it was, one day to be only a bottle neck, and to serve as a water glass to a bird's cage. Everything here appeared lovely to our bottle, for it was again in the green wood, amid joy and feasting. Again it heard music and song, and the noise and murmur of a crowd, especially in that part of the garden where the lamps blazed, and the paper lanterns displayed their brilliant colors. It stood in a distant walk, certainly, but a place pleasant for contemplation, and it carried a light, and was at once useful and ornamental. In such an hour it is easy to forget that one has spent 20 years in a loft, and a good thing it is to be able to do so. Close before the bottle passed a single pair, like the bridal pair, the mate and the furrier's daughter, who had so long ago wandered in the wood. It seemed to the bottle as if he were living that time over again. Not only the guests, but other people were walking in the garden, who were allowed to witness the splendor and the festivities. Among the latter came an old maid, who seemed to be quite alone in the world. She was thinking, like the bottle, of the green wood, and of a young betrothed pair, who were closely connected with herself. She was thinking of that hour, the happiest of her life, in which she had taken part when she had herself been one of that betrothed pair. Such hours are never to be forgotten, let a maiden be as old as she may. But she did not recognize the bottle, neither did the bottle notice the old maid. And so we often pass each other in the world when we meet, as did these two, even while together in the same town. The bottle was taken from the garden, and again sent to a wine merchant, where it was once more filled with wine, and sold to an aeronaut, who was to make an ascent in his balloon on the following Sunday. A great crowd assembled to witness the sight. Military music had been engaged, and many other preparations made. The bottle saw it all from the basket in which he lay close to a live rabbit. The rabbit was quite excited because he knew that he was to be taken up and let down again in a parachute. The bottle, however, knew nothing of the up or the down. He saw only that the balloon was swelling larger and larger till it could swell no more, and began to rise and be restless. Then the ropes which held it were cut through, and the aerial ship rose in the air with the aeronaut and the basket containing the bottle and the rabbit, while the music sounded and all the people shouted, "Hurrah!" "This is a wonderful journey up into the air," thought the bottle. "It is a new way of sailing, and here at least there is no fear of striking against anything." Thousands of people gazed at the balloon, and the old maid who was in the garden saw it also, for she stood at the open window of the garret, by which hung the cage containing the linnet, who then had no water glass, but was obliged to be contented with an old cup. In the window-sill stood a myrtle in a pot, and this had been pushed a little on one side, that it might not fall out, for the old maid was leaning out of the window that she might see. And she did see distinctly the aeronaut in the balloon, and how he let down the rabbit in the parachute, and then drank to the health of all the spectators in the wine from the bottle. After doing this, he hurled it high into the air. How little she thought that this was the very same bottle which her friend had thrown aloft in her honor, on that happy day of rejoicing in the green wood in her youthful days. The bottle had no time to think, when raised so suddenly, and before it was aware, it reached the highest point it had ever attained in its life. Steeples and roofs lay far, far beneath it, and the people looked as tiny as possible. Then it began to descend much more rapidly than the rabbit had done, made somersaults in the air, and felt itself quite young and unfettered, although it was half full of wine. But this did not last long. What a journey it was! All the people could see the bottle, for the sun shone upon it. The balloon was already far away, and very soon the bottle was far away also, for it fell upon a roof and broke in pieces. But the pieces had got such an impetus in them that they could not stop themselves. They went jumping and rolling about, till at last they fell into the courtyard, and were broken into still smaller pieces. Only the neck of the bottle managed to keep whole, and it was broken off as clean as if it had been cut with a diamond. "That would make a capital bird's glass," said one of the cellarmen. But none of them had either a bird or a cage, and it was not to be expected they would provide one just because they had found a bottle neck that could be used as a glass. But the old maid who lived in the garret had a bird, and it really might be useful to her, so the bottle neck was provided with a cork and taken up to her. And, as it often happens in life, the part that had been uppermost was now turned downwards, and it was filled with fresh water. Then they hung it in the cage of the little bird, who sang and twittered more merrily than ever. "Ah, you have good reason to sing," said the bottle neck, which was looked upon as something very remarkable, because it had been in a balloon. Nothing further was known of its history. As it hung there in the bird's cage, it could hear the noise and murmur of the people in the street below, as well as the conversation of the old maid in the room within. An old friend had just come to visit her, and they talked, not about the bottle neck, but of the myrtle in the window. "No, you must not spend $1 for your daughter's bridal bouquet," said the old maid. "You shall have a beautiful little bunch for a nosegay, full of blossoms. Do you see how splendidly the tree has grown? It has been raised from only a little sprig of myrtle that you gave me on the day after my betrothal, and from which I was to make my own bridal bouquet when a year had passed. But that day never came. The eyes were closed which were to have been my light and joy through life. In the depths of the sea, my beloved sleeps sweetly. The myrtle has become an old tree, and I am a still older woman. Before the sprig you gave me faded, I took a spray and planted it in the earth. And now, as you see, it has become a large tree, and a bunch of the blossoms shall at last appear at a wedding festival in the bouquet of your daughter." There were tears in the eyes of the old maid as she spoke of the beloved of her youth and of their betrothal in the wood. Many thoughts came into her mind, but the thought never came that quite close to her, in that very window, was a remembrance of those olden times. The neck of the bottle, which had, as it were, shouted for joy when the cork flew out with a bang on the betrothal day. But the bottle neck did not recognize the old maid. He had not been listening to what she had related, perhaps because he was thinking so much about her. The neighboring families. One would have thought that something important was going on in the duck pond, but it was nothing after all. All the ducks lying quietly on the water or standing on their heads in it, for they could do that, at once swarmed to the sides. The traces of their feet were seen in the wet earth, and their cackling was heard far and wide. The water, which a few moments before had been as clear and smooth as a mirror, became very troubled. Before, every tree, every neighboring bush, the old farmhouse with the holes in the roof and the swallow's nest, and especially the great rose bush full of flowers, had been reflected in it. The rose bush covered the wall and hung out over the water, in which everything was seen as if in a picture, except that it all stood on its head. But when the water was troubled, everything got mixed up, and the picture was gone. 2 feathers which the fluttering ducks had lost floated up and down. Suddenly they took a rush, as if the wind were coming, but as it did not come, they had to lie still, and the water once more became quiet and smooth. The roses were again reflected. They were very beautiful, but they did not know it, for no one had told them. The sun shone among the delicate leaves. Everything breathed forth the loveliest fragrance, and all felt as we do when we are filled with joy at the thought of our happiness. "How beautiful existence is," said each rose. "The only thing that I wish for is to be able to kiss the sun, because it is so warm and bright. I should also like to kiss those roses down in the water, which are so much like us, and the pretty little birds down in the nest. There are some up above, too. They put out their heads and pipe softly. They have no feathers like their father and mother. We have good neighbors, both below and above. How beautiful existence is. The young ones above and below. Those below were really only shadows in the water, were sparrows. Their parents were sparrows too, and had taken possession of the empty swallow's nest of last year, and now lived in it as if it were their own property. "Are those the ducks' children swimming here?" asked the young sparrows when they saw the feathers on the water. "If you must ask questions, ask sensible ones," said their mother. "Don't you see that they are feathers, such as I wear, and you will wear too? But ours are finer. Still, I should like to have them up in the nest, for they keep one warm. I am very curious to know what the ducks were so startled about. Not about us, certainly, although I did say peep to you pretty loudly. The thick-headed roses ought to know why, but they know nothing at all. They only look at themselves and smell. I am heartily tired of such neighbors. Zong, listen to the dear little birds up there," said the roses. "They begin to want to sing too, but are not able to manage it yet. But it will soon come. What a pleasure that must be. It is fine to have such cheerful neighbors." Suddenly 2 horses came galloping up to be watered. A peasant boy rode on one, and he had taken off all his clothes except his large, broad black hat. The boy whistled like a bird and rode into the pond where it was deepest, and as he passed the rose bush he plucked a rose and stuck it in his hat. Now he looked dressed and rode on. The other roses looked after their sister and asked each other, "Where can she be going to?" But none of them knew. "I should like to go out into the world for once," said one. "But here at home, among our green leaves, it is beautiful too. The whole day long the sun shines bright and warm, and in the night the sky shines more beautifully still. We can see that through all the little holes in it." They meant the stars, but they knew no better. "We make it lively about the house," said the sparrow mother. and people say that a swallow's nest brings luck, so they are glad of us. But such neighbors as ours, a rose bush on the wall like that causes damp. I dare say it will be taken away. Then we shall perhaps have some corn growing here. The roses are good for nothing but to be looked at and to be smelt, or at most to be stuck in a hat. Every year, as I have been told by my mother, they fall off. The farmer's wife preserves them and strews salt among them. Then they get a French name, which I neither can pronounce nor care to, and are put into the fire to make a nice smell. You see, that's their life. They exist only for the eye and the nose. Now you know. In the evening, when the gnats were playing about in the warm air and in the red clouds, the nightingale came and sang to the roses that the beautiful was like sunshine to the world, and that the beautiful lived forever. The roses thought that the nightingale was singing about itself, and that one might easily have believed. They had no idea that the song was about them. But they were very pleased with it, and wondered whether all the little sparrows could become nightingales. "I understand the song of that bird very well," said the young sparrows. "There was only one word that was not clear to me. What does the beautiful mean?" "Nothing at all," answered their mother. "That's only something external. Up at the hall, where the pigeons have their own house, and corn and peas are strewn before them every day, I have dined with them myself, and that you shall do in time too. For tell me what company you keep, and I'll tell you who you are. Up at the hall they have 2 birds with green necks and a crest upon their heads. They can spread out their tails like a great wheel, and these are so bright with various colors that it makes one's eyes ache. These birds are called peacocks, and that is the beautiful. If they were only plucked a little, they would look no better than the rest of us. I would have plucked them already if they had not been so big." "I'll pluck them," piped the young sparrow, who had no feathers yet. In the farmhouse lived a young married couple. They loved each other dearly, were industrious and active, and everything in their home looked very nice. On Sundays, the young wife came down early, plucked a handful of the most beautiful roses, and put them into a glass of water, which she placed upon the cupboard. "Now I see that it is Sunday," said the husband, kissing his little wife. They sat down, read their hymn book, and held each other by the hand, while the sun shone down upon the fresh roses and upon them. "This sight is really too tedious," said the sparrow mother, who could see into the room from her nest, and she flew away. The same thing happened on the following Sunday, for every Sunday fresh roses were put into the glass, but the rose bush bloomed as beautifully as ever. The young sparrows now had feathers, and wanted very much to fly with their mother, but she would not allow it, and so they had to stay at home. In one of her flights, however it may have happened, she was caught, before she was aware of it, in a horsehair net, which some boys had attached to a tree. The horsehair was drawn tightly round her leg, as tightly as if the latter were to be cut off. She was in great pain and terror. The boys came running up and seized her, and in no gentle way either. "It's only a sparrow," they said. They did not, however, let her go, but took her home with them, and every time she cried, they hit her on the beak. In the farmhouse was an old man who understood making soap into cakes and balls, both for shaving and washing. He was a merry old man, always wandering about. On seeing the sparrow which the boys had brought, and which they said they did not want, he asked, "Shall we make it look very pretty?" At these words, an icy shudder ran through the sparrow mother. Out of his box, in which were the most beautiful colors, The old man took a quantity of shining leaf gold, while the boys had to go and fetch some white of egg, with which the sparrow was to be smeared all over. The gold was stuck onto this, and the sparrow mother was now gilded all over. But she, trembling in every limb, did not think of the adornment. Then the soap man tore off a small piece from the red lining of his old jacket, and cutting it so as to make it look like a cock's comb, he stuck it to the bird's head. "Now you will see the gold jacket fly," said the old man, letting the sparrow go, which flew away in deadly fear, with the sun shining upon her. How she glittered! All the sparrows, and even a crow, and an old boy, he was too, were startled at the sight, but still they flew after her to learn what kind of strange bird she was. Driven by fear and horror, she flew homeward. She was almost sinking, fainting to the earth, while the flock of pursuing birds increased, some even attempting to peck at her. "Look at her! Look at her!" they all cried. "Look at her! Look at her!" cried her little ones as she approached the nest. "That is certainly a young peacock, for it glitters in all colors. It makes one's eyes ache, as Mother told us. Peep, that's the beautiful." And then they pecked at the bird with their little beaks, so that it was impossible for her to get into the nest. She was so exhausted that she couldn't even say, "Peep," much less, "I am your own mother." The other birds, too, now fell upon the sparrow, and plucked off feather after feather, until she fell bleeding into the rose bush. "Poor creature," said all the roses, "only be still, and we will hide you. Lean your little head against us." The sparrow spread out her wings once more, then drew them closely to her, and lay dead near the neighboring family, the beautiful, fresh roses. "Peep," sounded from the nest. "Where can Mother be so long? It's more than I can understand. It cannot be a trick of hers, and mean that we are now to take care of ourselves. She has left us the house as an inheritance, but to which of us is it to belong when we have families of our own? Yes, it won't do for you to stay with me when I increase my household with a wife and children," said the smallest. "I dare say I shall have more wives and children than you," said the second. "But I am the eldest," exclaimed the third. Then they all got excited. They hit out with their wings, pecked with their beaks, and flop! One after another was thrown out of the nest. There they lay with their anger, holding their heads on one side and blinking the eye that was turned upwards. That was their way of looking foolish. They could fly a little. By practice they learned to improve, and at last they agreed upon a sign by which to recognize each other if they should meet in the world later on. It was to be one peep and 3 scratches on the ground with the left foot. The young one who had remained behind in the nest made himself as broad as he could, for he was the proprietor. But this greatness did not last long. In the night, the red flames burst through the window and seized the roof. The dry straw blazed up high, and the whole house, together with the young sparrow, was burned. The 2 others, who wanted to marry, thus saved their lives by a stroke of luck. When the sun rose again, and everything looked as refreshed as if it had had a quiet sleep, there only remained of the farmhouse a few black charred beams leaning against the chimney, which was now its own master. Thick smoke still rose from the ruins, but the rose bush stood yonder, fresh, blooming, and untouched, every flower and every twig being reflected in the clear water. "How beautifully the roses bloom before the ruined house," exclaimed a passer-by. "A pleasanter picture cannot be imagined. I must have that." And the man took out of his portfolio a little book with white leaves. He was a painter, and with his pencil he drew the smoking house, the charred beams, and the overhanging chimney, which bent more and more. In the foreground he put the large, blooming rose bush, which presented a charming view. For its sake alone, the whole picture had been drawn. Later in the day, the 2 sparrows who had been born there came by. "Where is the house?" they asked. "Where is the nest? Peep, all is burned, and our strong brother too. That's what he has now for keeping the nest. The roses got off very well. There they still stand with their red cheeks. They certainly do not mourn at their neighbors' misfortunes. I don't want to talk to them, and it looks miserable here. That's my opinion." And away they went, on a beautiful, sunny autumn day. One could almost have believed it was still the middle of summer. There hopped about in the dry, clean-swept courtyard before the principal entrance of the hall a number of black, white, and gaily colored pigeons, all shining in the sunlight. The pigeon mothers said to their young ones, stand in groups, for that looks much better." "What kind of creatures are those little gray ones that run about behind us?" asked an old pigeon with red and green in her eyes. Little gray ones, she cried. "They are sparrows and good creatures. We have always had the reputation of being pious, so we will allow them to pick up the corn with us. They don't interrupt our talk, and they scrape so prettily when they bow." Indeed, they were continually making 3-foot scrapings with the left foot, and also said, "Peep." By this means they recognized each other, for they were the sparrows from the nest on the burned house. "Here is excellent fare," said the sparrow. The pigeons strutted round one another, puffed out their chests mightily, and had their own private views and opinions. "Do you see that pouter pigeon?" said one to the other. "Do you see how she swallows the peas? She eats too many, and the best ones too. Coo-roo, coo-roo. How she lifts her crest, the ugly, spiteful creature. Coo-roo, coo-roo." And the eyes of all sparkled with malice. Stand in groups, little gray ones, coo-roo, coo-roo, coo-roo." So their chatter ran on, and so it will run on for thousands of years. The sparrows ate lustily, they listened attentively, and even stood in the ranks with the others. But it did not suit them at all. They were full, and so they left the pigeons, exchanging opinions about them, slipped in under the garden palings, and when they found the door leading into the house open, one of them, who was more than full, and therefore felt brave, hopped onto the threshold. "Peep," said he, "I may venture that." "Peep," said the other, "so may I, and something more too." And he hopped into the room. No one was there. The third sparrow, seeing this, flew still farther into the room, exclaiming, "All or nothing. It is a curious man's nest all the same. And what have they put up here? What is it?" Close to the sparrows, the roses were blooming. They were reflected in the water, and the charred beams leaned against the overhanging chimney. "Do tell me what this is. How comes this in a room at the hall?" And all 3 sparrows wanted to fly over the roses and the chimney, but flew against a flat wall. It was all a picture, a great, splendid picture, which the artist had painted from a sketch. "Peep," said the sparrows. "It's nothing. It only looks like something. Peep, that is the beautiful. Do you understand it? I don't." And they flew away, for some people came into the room. Days and years went by. The pigeons had often cooed, not to say growled. the spiteful creatures. The sparrows had been frozen in winter and had lived merrily in summer. They were all betrothed, or married, or whatever you like to call it. They had little ones, and of course each one thought his own the handsomest and cleverest. One flew this way, another that, and when they met, they recognized each other by their peep and the 3 scrapes with the left foot. The eldest had remained an old maid and had no nest nor young ones. It was her pet idea to see a great city, so she flew to Copenhagen. There was a large house painted in many gay colors, standing close to the castle and the canal, upon which latter were to be seen many ships laden with apples and pottery. The windows of the house were broader at the bottom than at the top, and when the sparrows looked through them, every room appeared to them like a tulip with the brightest colors and shades. But in the middle of the tulip stood white men, made of marble. A few were of plaster. Still, looked at with sparrows' eyes, that comes to the same thing. Up on the roof stood a metal chariot drawn by metal horses, and the goddess of victory, also of metal, was driving. It was Thorwaldsen's museum. "How it shines, how it shines," said the maiden sparrow. "I suppose that is the beautiful. Peep, but here it is larger than a peacock." She still remembered what in her childhood's days her mother had looked upon as the greatest among the beautiful. She flew down into the courtyard. There everything was extremely fine. Palms and branches were painted on the walls, and in the middle of the court stood a great blooming rose tree, spreading out its fresh boughs, covered with roses, over a grave. Thither flew the maiden sparrow, for she saw several of her own kind there, a peep, and 3 foot scrapings. In this way she had often greeted throughout the year, and no one here had responded, for those who are once parted do not meet every day, and so this greeting had become a habit with her. But today 2 old sparrows and a young one answered with a peep, and the thrice repeated scrape with the left foot. "Ah, good day, good day." They were 2 old ones from the nest and a little one of the family. "Do we meet here? It's a grand place, but there's not much to eat. This is the beautiful. Peep, many people came out of the side rooms where the beautiful marble statues stood and approached the grave, where lay the great master who had created these works of art. All stood with enraptured faces round Thorwaldsen's grave, and a few picked up the fallen rose leaves and preserved them. They had come from afar, one from mighty England, others from Germany and France. The fairest of the ladies plucked one of the roses and hid it in her bosom. Then the sparrows thought that the roses reigned here, and that the house had been built for their sake. That appeared to them to be really too much, but since all the people showed their love for the roses, they did not wish to be behindhand. "Peep," they said, sweeping the ground with their tails, and blinking with one eye at the roses. They had not looked at them long before they were convinced that they were their old neighbors. And so they really were. The painter who had drawn the rose bush near the ruined house had afterwards obtained permission to dig it up and had given it to the architect, for finer roses had never been seen. The architect had planted it upon Thorwaldsen's grave, where it bloomed as an emblem of the beautiful, and yielded fragrant red rose leaves to be carried as mementos to distant lands. "Have you obtained an appointment here in the city?" asked the sparrows. The roses nodded. They recognized their gray neighbors and were pleased to see them again. How glorious it is to live and to bloom, to see old friends again, and happy faces every day. It is as if every day were a festival. "Peep," said the sparrows. "Yes, they are really our old neighbors. We remember their origin near the pond. Peep, how they have got on. Yes, some succeed while they are asleep. Ah, there's a faded leaf. I can see that quite plainly. And they pecked at it till it fell off. But the tree stood there fresher and greener than ever. The roses bloomed in the sunshine on Thorwaldsen's grave and became associated with his immortal name." Beautiful. Alfred the sculptor. Yes, you know him, don't you? We all know him. He was awarded the gold medal, traveled to Italy, and came home again. He was young then. In fact, he is still young, though he is 10 years older than he was at that time. After he returned home, he visited one of the little provincial towns on the island of Zealand. The whole village knew who the stranger was, and in his honor, one of the richest families gave a party. Everyone of any importance or owning any property was invited. It was quite an event, and all the village knew about it without its being announced by the town crier. Apprentice boys and the children of poor people, and even some of their parents, stood outside the house, looking at the lighted windows with their drawn curtains. And the watchman could imagine that he was giving the party. There were so many people in his street. There was an air of festivity everywhere. And inside the house, too. For Mr. Alfred the sculptor was there. He talked and told stories, and everybody listened to him with pleasure and enthusiasm, but none more so than the elderly widow of a state official. As far as Mr. Alfred was concerned, she was like a blank sheet of gray blotting paper, absorbing everything that was said and demanding more. She was highly susceptible and unbelievably ignorant, a sort of female Caspar Hauser. "I should love to see Rome," she said. "It must be a wonderful city, with all the many strangers continually arriving there. Now, do tell us what Rome is like. How does the city look when you come in by the gate?" "It is not easy to describe it," said the young sculptor. "There's a great open place, and in the middle of it there is an obelisk that is 4,000 years old." "An organist," cried the lady, who had never heard the word. "Obelisk." Some of the guests could hardly keep from laughing, among them the sculptor, but the smile that rose to his lips quickly faded away. For he saw, close by the lady, a pair of dark blue eyes. They belonged to the daughter of the lady who had been talking, and anyone with such a daughter could not really be silly. The mother was like a fountain of questions, and the daughter who listened silently might pass for the naiad of the fountain. How beautiful she was! She was something for a sculptor to look at, but not to speak with, for indeed she talked but very little. "Has the Pope a large family?" asked the lady. And the young man answered considerately, as if the question had been put differently. "No, he doesn't come of a very great family." "That's not what I mean," said the lady. "I mean, does he have a wife and children?" "The Pope isn't allowed to marry," he replied. "I don't approve of that," said the lady. She might well have talked and questioned him more intelligently, but if she hadn't said and asked what she did, would her daughter have leaned so gracefully on her shoulder, looking straight before her, with an almost melancholy smile on her lips? And Mr. Alfred told them of the glorious colors of Italy, the purple of the mountains, the blue of the Mediterranean, the blue of the southern skies, a beauty that could only be surpassed in the north by the deep blue eyes of a maiden. This he said with peculiar meaning, but she who should have understood it looked quite unconscious, and that, too, was charming. "Ah, Italy," sighed some of the guests. "Traveling," sighed others. "Charming, charming." "Well," said the widow, "if I win $50,000 in the lottery, we'll travel. My daughter and I. You, Mr. Alfred, must be our guide. We'll all three go with just one or two good friends with us." Then she smiled in such a friendly manner at the company that each of them could imagine he was the person who would accompany them to Italy. "Yes, we'll go to Italy, but not to the parts where the robbers are. We'll stay in Rome and only travel by the great highways where we'll be safe." And the daughter sighed very gently. And how much may lie in one little sigh or be read into it? The young man read a great deal into it. Those two blue eyes, bright that evening in his honor, must conceal treasures of heart and mind rarer than all the glories of Rome. When he left the party, he had lost his heart, lost it completely to the young lady. Now, the widow's house was where Mr. Alfred the sculptor could most frequently be found. It was understood that his calls were not for the lady herself, though he and she did all the talking. He really came for the sake of the daughter. They called her Kayla. Her real name was Karen Moline, but the two names had been contracted into the single name Kayla. She was extremely, but some people said she was rather dull and probably slept late in the mornings. "She has been accustomed to that since childhood," said her mother. "She is as beautiful as Venus, and a beauty always tires easily. She does sleep rather late, but that's what makes her eyes so bright." What a power there was in these clear eyes, these deep blue eyes. Still waters run deep. The young man felt the truth of that proverb, and his heart sank into the depths. He spoke of his adventures, and Mamma always asked the same naive and pertinent questions she had asked at their first meeting. It was a delight to hear Mr. Alfred speak. He told them of Naples, of trips to Mount Vesuvius, and showed them colored prints of some of the eruptions. The widow had never heard of such things before, much less taken time to think about them. "Mercy save us," she said. "So that's a burning mountain. But isn't it dangerous for the people who live there?" "Entire cities have been destroyed," he answered. "For example, Pompeii and Herculaneum." "Oh, the poor people. And you saw all that yourself?" "Well, no. I didn't see any of the eruptions shown in these pictures, but I'll show you a drawing I made of an eruption I did see." He laid a pencil sketch on the table, and when Mamma, who had been studying the highly colored prints, glanced at the black and white drawing, she cried in amazement. "When you saw it, did it throw up white fire?" For a moment, Alfred's respect for Kayla's Mamma nearly vanished. But then, dazzled by the light from Kayla, he decided it was natural for the old lady to have no eye for color. After all, it didn't matter, for Kayla's Mamma had the most wonderful thing of all. She had Kayla herself. And Alfred and Kayla were engaged, which was inevitable, and the engagement was announced in the town newspaper. Mamma brought 30 copies of the paper, so she could cut out the announcement and send it to her friends. The betrothed couple were happy, and the Mamma-in-law-to-be was happy too. She said it seemed like being related to Thorvaldsen himself. "At any rate, you are his successor," she told Alfred. And it seemed to Alfred that Mamma had this time really said something clever. Kayla said nothing, but her eyes sparkled. Her every gesture was graceful. Yes, she was beautiful. That cannot be repeated too often. Alfred made busts of Kayla and his future Mamma-in-law. They sat for him and watched how he molded and smoothed the soft clay between his fingers. I suppose it's only for us that you do this common work, said Mama-in-law-to-be. And don't have your servant do all that dabbing together. No, I have to mold the clay myself, he explained. Oh yes, you're always so exceedingly polite, said Mama, while Kala silently pressed his hand, still soiled by the clay. Then he unfolded to both of them the loveliness of nature in creation, explaining how the living stood higher in the scale than the dead, how the plant was above the mineral, the animal above the plant, and man above the animal, how mind and beauty are united in outward form, and how it was the task of the sculptor to seize that beauty and imprison it in his works. Kala sat silent and nodded approval of the thought, while Mama-in-law confessed, "It's hard to follow all that, but my thoughts manage to hobble slowly along after you. They whirl around, but I try to hold them fast." And the power of Kayla's beauty held Alfred fast, seizing him and mastering him and filling his whole soul. There was beauty in Kala's every feature. It sparkled in her eyes, lurked in the corners of her mouth, and even in each movement of her fingers. The sculptor saw this. He spoke only of her, thought only of her, until the two became one. Thus it might be said that she also spoke often, for he was always talking of her, and they two were one. Such was the betrothal, and now came the wedding day, with bridesmaids and presents, all duly mentioned in the wedding speech. Mama-in-law had set up a bust of Thorvaldsen, attired in a dressing gown at one end of the table, for it was her whim that he was to be a guest. There were songs and toasts, for it was a gay wedding, and they were a handsome pair. "Pygmalion gets his Galatea," one of the songs said. "That is something from mythology," said Mama-in-law. Next day the young couple left for Copenhagen, where they were to live. Mama-in-law went with them, to give them a helping hand, she explained, which meant to take charge of the house. Kala was to live in a doll's house. Everything was so bright, new, and fine. There the three of them sat, and as for Alfred, to use a proverb that describes his circumstances, he sat like the bishop in the goose yard. The magic of form had fascinated him. He had regarded the case and had no interest in learning what the case contained, and that is unfortunate, very unfortunate in married life. If the case breaks and the gilding rubs off, the purchaser may repent of his bargain. It is very embarrassing to discover in a large party that one's suspender buttons are coming off and that one has no belt to fall back on. But it is still worse to realize at a great party that one's wife and mother-in-law are talking nonsense, and that one cannot think of a clever piece of wit to cover up the stupidity of it. The young couple often sat hand in hand, he speaking, and she letting drop a word now and then, with always the same melody, like a clock striking the same 2 or 3 notes constantly. It was really a mental relief when one of her friends, Sophie, came to visit them. Sophie wasn't pretty. To be sure, she was not deformed. Kayla always said she was a little crooked, but no one but a female friend would have noticed that. She was a very level-headed girl and had no idea that she might ever become dangerous here. Her visits brought a fresh breath of air into the doll's house, air that they all agreed was certainly needed there. But they felt they needed more airing, so they came out into the air, and Mama-in-law and the young couple traveled to Italy. "Thank heaven we are back in our own home again," said both mother and daughter when they and Alfred returned home a year later. "Traveling is no fun," said Mama-in-law. "On the contrary, it's very tiring. Pardon me for saying so. I found the time dragged, even though I had my children with me. And it is expensive, very expensive to travel. All those galleries you have to see, and all the things you have to look at. You must do it for self-protection, because when you get back, people are sure to ask you about them. And then they're sure to tell you that you've missed the most worthwhile things. I got so tired at last of those everlasting Madonnas. I thought I would turn into a Madonna myself. And the food one gets, said Kayla. Yes, agreed Mama. Not even a dish of honest meat soup. It is awful the way they cook. Gee, and Kayla had become tired from traveling. She was always tired. That was the trouble. Sophie came to live with them, and her presence was a real help. Mama-in-law had to admit that Sophie understood both housekeeping and art, though you would hardly have expected a knowledge of the last from a person of her modest background. Moreover, she was honest and loyal. She showed that clearly when Kala lay sick, fading away. If the case is everything, that case should be strong, or it is all over. And it was all over with the case. Kala died. She was so beautiful, said Mama. She was very different from the antiques because they're all so damaged. Kayla was completely perfect, just as a beauty should be. Alfred wept, and the mother wept, and both went into mourning. The black dresses became Mama very well, so she wore her mourning the longer. Moreover, she soon experienced another grief when she saw Alfred marry again. And he married Sophie, who had no looks at all. He has gone from one extreme to the other, said Mama-in-law. Gone from the most beautiful to the ugliest. How could he forget his first wife? Men have no constancy. Now, my husband was entirely different, and he died before I did. Pygmalion got his Galatea, said Alfred. Yes, that's what the wedding song said. I really fell in love with a beautiful statue, which came to life in my arms. But the soulmate that heaven sends down to us, one of its angels who can comfort and sympathize with and uplift us, I have not found or won till now. You came to me, Sophie, not in the glory of superficial beauty, but fair enough, prettier than was necessary. The most important thing is still the most important. You came to teach a sculptor that his work is only clay and dust, only the outward form in a fabric that passes away, and that we must seek the spirit within. Poor Kayla. Ours was but a wayfarer's life. In the next world, where we shall come together through sympathy, we shall probably be half strangers to each other. That was not spoken kindly, said Sophie, not like a true Christian. In the next world, where there is no marriage, but where, as you say, souls find each other through sympathy, where everything beautiful is developed and elevated, her soul may attain such completeness that it may resound far more melodiously than mine. Then you will again utter the first exciting cry of your love. Beautiful, beautiful. The toad. The well was deep, and therefore the rope had to be a long one. It was heavy work turning the handle when anyone had to raise a bucketful of water over the edge of the well. Though the water was clear, the sun never looked down far enough into the well to mirror itself in the waters, but as far as its beams could reach, green things grew forth between the stones in the sides of the well. Down below dwelt a family of the toad race. They had, in fact, come head over heels down the well in the person of the old mother toad, who was still alive. The green frogs, who had been established there a long time and swam about in the water, called them well guests. But the newcomers seemed determined to stay where they were, for they found it very agreeable, living in a dry place, as they called the wet stones. The mother frog had once been a traveler. She happened to be in the water bucket when it was drawn up, but the light became too strong for her, and she got a pain in her eyes. Fortunately, she scrambled out of the bucket, but she fell into the water with a terrible flop and had to lie sick for 3 days with pains in her back. She certainly had not much to tell of the things up above, but she knew this, and all the frogs knew it, that the well was not all the world. The mother toad might have told this and that, if she had chosen, but she never answered when they asked her anything, and so they left off asking. "She's thick and fat and ugly," said the young green frogs, "and her children will be just as ugly as she is." "That may be," retorted the mother toad, "but one of them has a jewel in his head, or else I have the jewel." The young frogs listened and stared, and as these words did not please them, they made grimaces and dived down under the water. But the little toads kicked up their hind legs from mere pride, for each of them thought that he must have the jewel. And then they sat and held their heads quite still. But at length they asked what it was that made them so proud, and what kind of a thing a jewel might be. "Oh, it is such a splendid and precious thing that I cannot describe it," said the mother toad. "It's something which one carries about for one's own pleasure, and that makes other people angry. But don't ask me any questions, for I shan't answer you." "And well, I haven't got the jewel," said the smallest of the toads. She was as ugly as a toad can be. "Why should I have such a precious thing? And if it makes others angry, it can't give me any pleasure. No, I only wish I could get to the edge of the well and look out. It must be beautiful up there." "You'd better stay where you are," said the old mother toad, "for you know everything here, and you can tell what you have. Take care of the bucket, for it will crush you to death, and even if you get into it safely, you may fall out. And it's not everyone who falls so cleverly as I did, and gets away with whole legs and whole bones." "A quack," said the little toad, and that's just as if one of us were to say, "Aha." She had an immense desire to get to the edge of the well and to look over. She felt such a longing for the green up there. And the next morning, when it chanced that the bucket was being drawn up, filled with water, and stopped for a moment just in front of the stone on which the toad sat, the little creature's heart moved within it, and our toad jumped into the filled bucket, which presently was drawn to the top and emptied out. "Ugh, you beast," said the farm laborer who emptied the bucket when he saw the toad. "You're the ugliest thing I've seen for one while." And he made a kick with his wooden shoe at the toad, which just escaped being crushed by managing to scramble into the nettles which grew high by the well's brink. Here she saw stem by stem, but she looked up also. The sun shone through the leaves, which were quite transparent, and she felt as a person would feel who steps suddenly into a great forest where the sun looks in between the branches and leaves. "It's much nicer here than down in the well. I should like to stay here my whole life long," said the little toad. So she lay there for an hour, yes, for 2 hours. "I wonder what is to be found up here. As I have come so far, I must try to go still farther." And so she crawled on as fast as she could crawl, and got out upon the highway, where the sun shone upon her, and the dust powdered her all over as she marched across the way. "I've got to a dry place now, and no mistake," said the toad. "It's almost too much of a good thing here. It tickles one so." She came to the ditch, and forget-me-nots were growing there, and meadow sweet, and a very little way off was a hedge of whitethorn, and elder bushes grew there too, and bindweed with white flowers. Gay colors were to be seen here, and a butterfly, too, was flitting by. The toad thought it was a flower which had broken loose, that it might look about better in the world, which was quite a natural thing to do. "If one could only make such a journey as that," said the toad. "Croak, how capital that would be." 8 days and 8 nights she stayed by the well, and experienced no want of provisions. On the 9th day she thought, "Forward, onward." But what could she find more charming and beautiful? Perhaps a little toad, or a few green frogs. During the last night there had been a sound borne on the breeze, as if there were cousins in the neighborhood. It's a glorious thing to live, glorious to get out of the well, and to lie among the stinging nettles, and to crawl along the dusty road. But onward, onward, that we may find frogs or a little toad. We can't do without that. Nature alone is not enough for one. And so she went forward on her journey. She came out into the open field, to a great pond, round about which grew reeds, and she walked into it. "It will be too damp for you here," said the frogs, "but you are very welcome. Are you a he or a she? But it doesn't matter. You are equally welcome." Oh, and she was invited to the concert in the evening, the family concert. Great enthusiasm and thin voices. We know the sort of thing. No refreshments were given, only there was plenty to drink, for the whole pond was free. "Now I shall resume my journey," said the little toad, for she always felt a longing for something better. She saw the stars shining, so large and so bright, and she saw the moon gleaming, and then she saw the sun rise and mount higher and higher. Perhaps, after all, I am still in a well, only in a larger well. I must get higher yet. I feel a great restlessness and longing. And when the moon became round and full, the poor creature thought, "I wonder if that is the bucket which will be let down, and into which I must step to get higher up. Or is the sun the great bucket? How great it is! How bright it is! It can take up all. I must look out, that I may not miss the opportunity. Oh, how it seems to shine in my head! I don't think the jewel can shine brighter, but I haven't the jewel. Not that I cry about that. No, I must go higher up, into splendor and joy. I feel so confident, and yet I am afraid. It's a difficult step to take, and yet it must be taken. Onward, therefore, straight onward. She took a few steps, such as a crawling animal may take, and soon found herself on a road beside which people dwelt. But there were flower gardens as well as kitchen gardens, and she sat down to rest by a kitchen garden. What a number of different creatures there are that I never knew, and how beautiful and great the world is. But one must look round in it, and not stay in one spot. And then she hopped into the kitchen garden. How green it is here, how beautiful it is here. "I know that," said the caterpillar on the leaf. "My leaf is the largest here. It hides half the world from me, but I don't care for the world." Cluck, cluck, and some fowls came. They tripped about in the cabbage garden. The fowl who marched at the head of them had a long sight, and she spied the caterpillar on the green leaf, and pecked at it, so that the caterpillar fell on the ground, where it twisted and writhed. The fowl looked at it first with one eye, and then with the other, for she did not know what the end of this writhing would be. "It doesn't do that with a good will," thought the fowl, and lifted up her head to peck at the caterpillar. The toad was so horrified at this that she came crawling straight up towards the fowl. "Aha! It has allies," quoth the fowl. "Just look at the crawling thing." And then the fowl turned away. "I don't care for the little green morsel. It would only tickle my throat." The other fowls took the same view of it, and they all turned away together. "I writhed myself free," said the caterpillar. "What a good thing it is when one has presence of mind. But the hardest thing remains to be done, and that is to get on my leaf again. Where is it?" And the little toad came up and expressed her sympathy. She was glad that in her ugliness she had frightened the fowls. "What do you mean by that?" cried the caterpillar. "I wriggled myself free from the fowl. You are very disagreeable to look at. Cannot I be left in peace on my own property? Now I smell cabbage. Now I am near my leaf. Nothing is so beautiful as property. But I must go higher up." "Yes, higher up," said the little toad. "Higher up. She feels just as I do, but she's not in a good humor today. That's because of the fright. We all want to go higher up." And she looked up as high as ever she could. The stork sat in his nest on the roof of the farmhouse. He clapped with his beak, and the mother stork clapped with hers. "How high up they live," thought the toad. "If one could only get as high as that." In the farmhouse lived two young students. The one was a poet, and the other a scientific searcher into the secrets of nature. The one sang and wrote joyously of everything that God had created and how it was mirrored in his heart. He sang it out clearly, sweetly, richly, in well-sounding verses, while the other investigated created matter itself and even cut it open where need was. He looked upon God's creation as a great sum in arithmetic, subtracted, multiplied, and tried to know it within and without, and to talk with understanding concerning it. And that was a very sensible thing, and he spoke joyously and cleverly of it. They were good, joyful men, those two. "There sits a good specimen of a toad," said the naturalist. "I must have that fellow in a bottle of spirits." "You have two of them already," replied the poet. "Let the thing sit there and enjoy its life." "But it's so wonderfully ugly," persisted the first. "Yes, if we could find the jewel in its head," said the poet. "I too should be for cutting it open." "A jewel," cried the naturalist. "You seem to know a great deal about natural history. But is there not something beautiful in the popular belief that just as the toad is the ugliest of animals, it should often carry the most precious jewel in its head? Is it not just the same thing with men? What a jewel that was that Aesop had, and still more, Socrates." The toad did not hear any more, nor did she understand half of what she had heard. The two friends walked on, and thus she escaped the fate of being bottled up in spirits. "Those two also were speaking of the jewel," said the toad to herself. "What a good thing that I have not got it. I might have been in a very disagreeable position." Now there was a clapping on the roof of the farmhouse. Father Stork was making a speech to his family, and his family was glancing down at the two young men in the kitchen garden. "Man is the most conceited creature," said the stork. "Listen how their jaws are wagging, and for all that they can't clap properly, they boast of their gifts of eloquence and their language. Yes, a fine language truly. Why, it changes in every day's journey we make. One of them doesn't understand another. Now, we can speak our language over the whole earth, up in the north and in Egypt. And then, men are not able to fly, moreover. They rush along by means of an invention they call railway. But they often break their necks over it. It makes my beak turn cold when I think of it. The world could get on without men. We could do without them very well, so long as we only keep frogs and earthworms." That was a powerful speech, thought the little toad. What a great man that is yonder, and how high he sits, higher than ever I saw anyone sit yet, and how he can swim, she cried, as the stork soared away through the air with outspread pinions, and the mother stork began talking in the nest, and told about Egypt and the waters of the Nile, and the incomparable mud that was to be found in that strange land. And all this sounded new and very charming to the little toad. "I must go to Egypt," said she. "If the stork or one of his young ones would only take me, I would oblige him in return. Yes, I shall get to Egypt, for I feel so happy. All the longing and all the pleasure that I feel is much better than having a jewel in one's head." And it was just she who had the jewel. That jewel was the continual striving and desire to go upward, ever upward. It gleamed in her head, gleamed in joy, beamed brightly in her longing. Then, suddenly, up came the stork. He had seen the toad in the grass, and stooped down and seized the little creature anything but gently. The stork's beak pinched her, and the wind whistled. It was not exactly agreeable, but she was going upward, upward towards Egypt. And she knew it, and that was why her eyes gleamed, and a spark seemed to fly out of them. Quunk! Ah, the body was dead, the toad was killed, but the spark that had shot forth from her eyes, what became of that? The sunbeam took it up. The sunbeam carried the jewel from the head of the toad. Whither? Ask not the naturalist, rather ask the poet. He will tell it thee under the guise of a fairy tale. And the caterpillar on the cabbage and the stork family belong to the story. Think, the caterpillar is changed and turns into a beautiful butterfly. The stork family flies over mountains and seas to the distant Africa, and yet finds the shortest way home to the same country, to the same roof. Nay, that is almost too improbable, and yet it is true. You may ask the naturalist. He will confess it is so, and you know it yourself, for you have seen it. But the jewel in the head of the toad, seek it in the sun, see it there if you can. The brightness is too dazzling there. We have not yet such eyes as can see into the glories which God has created, but we shall receive them by and by. And that will be the most beautiful story of all, and we shall all have our share in it. The fir tree, far down in the forest, where the warm sun and the fresh air made a sweet resting place, grew a pretty little fir tree. And yet it was not happy. It wished so much to be tall like its companions, the pines and firs which grew around it. The sun shone, and the soft air fluttered its leaves, and the little peasant children passed by, prattling merrily. But the fir tree heeded them not. Sometimes the children would bring a large basket of raspberries or strawberries, wreathed on a straw, and seat themselves near the fir tree, and say, "Is it not a pretty little tree?" which made it feel more unhappy than before. And yet all this while the tree grew a notch or joint taller every year, for by the number of joints in the stem of a fir tree we can discover its age. Still, as it grew, it complained. "Oh, how I wish I were as tall as the other trees. Then I would spread out my branches on every side, and my top would overlook the wide world. I should have the birds building their nests on my boughs, and when the wind blew, I should bow with stately dignity like my tall companions." The tree was so discontented that it took no pleasure in the warm sunshine, the birds, or the rosy clouds that floated over it morning and evening. Sometimes, in winter, when the snow lay white and glittering on the ground, a hare would come springing along and jump right over the little tree. And then, how mortified it would feel. 2 winters passed, and when the third arrived, the tree had grown so tall that the hare was obliged to run round it. Yet it remained unsatisfied, and would exclaim, "Oh, if I could but keep on growing tall and old! There is nothing else worth caring for in the world." In the autumn, as usual, the woodcutters came and cut down several of the tallest trees, and the young fir tree, which was now grown to its full height, shuddered as the noble trees fell to the earth with a crash. After the branches were lopped off, the trunks looked so slender and bare that they could scarcely be recognized. Then they were placed upon wagons and drawn by horses out of the forest. Where were they going? What would become of them? The young fir tree wished very much to know. So in the spring, when the swallows and the storks came, it asked, "Do you know where those trees were taken? Did you meet them?" The swallows knew nothing, but the stork, after a little reflection, nodded his head and said, "Yes, I think I do. I met several new ships when I flew from Egypt, and they had fine masts that smelt like fir. I think these must have been the trees. I assure you they were stately, very stately. Oh, how I wish I were tall enough to go on the sea," said the fir tree. "What is the sea, and what does it look like?" "It would take too much time to explain," said the stork, flying quickly away. "Rejoice in thy youth," said the sunbeam. "Rejoice in thy fresh growth, and the young life that is in thee." And the wind kissed the tree, and the dew watered it with tears. But the fir tree regarded them not. Christmas time drew near, and many young trees were cut down, some even smaller and younger than the fir tree, who enjoyed neither rest nor peace with longing to leave its forest home. These young trees, which were chosen for their beauty, kept their branches, and were also laid on wagons and drawn by horses out of the forest. "Where are they going?" asked the fir tree. "They are not taller than I am. Indeed, one is much less. And why are the branches not cut off? Where are they going?" We know," sang the sparrows. "We have looked in at the windows of the houses in the town, and we know what is done with them. They are dressed up in the most splendid manner. We have seen them standing in the middle of a warm room and adorned with all sorts of beautiful things, honey cakes, gilded apples, playthings, and many hundreds of wax tapers." "And then," asked the fir tree, trembling through all its branches, "and then what happens?" "We did not see any more," said the sparrows, "but this was enough for us." "I wonder whether anything so brilliant will ever happen to me," thought the fir tree. "It would be much better than crossing the sea. I long for it almost with pain. Oh, when will Christmas be here? I am now as tall and well grown as those which were taken away last year. Oh, that I were now laid on the wagon, or standing in the warm room, with all that brightness and splendor around me. Something better and more beautiful is to come after, or the trees would not be so decked out. Yes, what follows will be grander and more splendid. What can it be? I am weary with longing. I scarcely know how I feel." "Rejoice with us," said the air and the sunlight. "Enjoy thine own bright life in the fresh air." But the tree would not rejoice, though it grew taller every day, and, winter and summer, its dark green foliage might be seen in the forest, while passers-by would say, "What a beautiful tree!" A short time before Christmas, the discontented fir tree was the first to fall. As the axe cut through the stem and divided the pith, the tree fell with a groan to the earth, conscious of pain and faintness, and forgetting all its anticipations of happiness in sorrow at leaving its home in the forest. It knew that it should never again see its dear old companions, the trees, nor the little bushes and many-colored flowers that had grown by its side. Perhaps not even the birds. Neither was the journey at all pleasant. The tree first recovered itself while being unpacked in the courtyard of a house with several other trees, and it heard a man say, "We only want one, and this is the prettiest." Then came two servants in grand livery and carried the fir tree into a large and beautiful apartment. On the walls hung pictures, and near the great stove stood great china vases with lions on the lids. There were rocking chairs, silken sofas, large tables covered with pictures, books, and playthings worth a great deal of money. At least the children said so. Then the fir tree was placed in a large tub full of sand, but green baize hung all around it so that no one could see it was a tub, and it stood on a very handsome carpet. How the fir tree trembled! What was going to happen to him now? Some young ladies came, and the servants helped them to adorn the tree. On one branch they hung little bags cut out of colored paper, and each bag was filled with sweetmeats. From other branches hung gilded apples and walnuts, as if they had grown there. And above and all round were hundreds of red, blue, and white tapers, which were fastened on the branches. Dolls, exactly like real babies, were placed under the green leaves. The tree had never seen such things before, and at the very top was fastened a glittering star made of tinsel. Oh, it was very beautiful. This evening, they all exclaimed, how bright it will be. Oh, that the evening were come, thought the tree, and the tapers lighted. Then I shall know what else is going to happen. Will the trees of the forest come to see me? I wonder if the sparrows will peep in at the windows as they fly. Shall I grow faster here and keep on all these ornaments summer and winter? But guessing was of very little use. It made his bark ache, and this pain is as bad for a slender fir tree as headache is for us. At last the tapers were lighted, and then what a glistening blaze of light the tree presented! It trembled so with joy in all its branches that one of the candles fell among the green leaves and burnt some of them. "Help! Help!" exclaimed the young ladies. But there was no danger, for they quickly extinguished the fire. After this, the tree tried not to tremble at all, though the fire frightened him. He was so anxious not to hurt any of the beautiful ornaments, even while their brilliancy dazzled him. And now the folding doors were thrown open, and a troop of children rushed in as if they intended to upset the tree. They were followed more silently by their elders. For a moment the little ones stood silent with astonishment, and then they shouted for joy, till the room rang, and they danced merrily round the tree, while one present after another was taken from it. What are they doing? What will happen next? Thought the fir. At last the candles burnt down to the branches and were put out. Then the children received permission to plunder the tree. Oh, how they rushed upon it, till the branches cracked, and had it not been fastened with the glistening star to the ceiling, it must have been thrown down. The children then danced about with their pretty toys, and no one noticed the tree, except the children's maid, who came and peeped among the branches to see if an apple or a fig had been forgotten. A story, cried the children, pulling a little fat man towards the tree. "Now we shall be in the green shade," said the man as he seated himself under it. "And the tree will have the pleasure of hearing also. But I shall only relate one story. What shall it be? Ivede Avede, or Humpty Dumpty, who fell downstairs but soon got up again, and at last married a princess." "Ivede Avede," cried some. "Humpty Dumpty," cried others, and there was a fine shouting and crying out. But the fir tree remained quite still, and thought to himself, "Shall I have anything to do with all this?" But he had already amused them as much as they wished. Then the old man told them the story of Humpty Dumpty, how he fell downstairs and was raised up again and married a princess. And the children clapped their hands and cried, "Tell another, tell another," for they wanted to hear the story of Ivede Avede, but they only had Humpty Dumpty. After this, the fir tree became quite silent and thoughtful. Never had the birds in the forest told such tales as Humpty Dumpty, who fell downstairs and yet married a princess. "Ah, yes, so it happens in the world," thought the fir tree. He believed it all, because it was related by such a nice man. "Ah, well," he thought, "who knows? Perhaps I may fall down, too, and marry a princess." And he looked forward joyfully to the next evening, expecting to be again decked out with lights and playthings, gold and fruit. "Tomorrow I will not tremble," thought he. "I will enjoy all my splendor, and I shall hear the story of Humpty Dumpty again, and perhaps Ivede Avede." And the tree remained quiet and thoughtful all night. In the morning the servants and the housemaid came in. "Now," thought the fir, "all my splendor is going to begin again." But they dragged him out of the room and upstairs to the garret, and threw him on the floor in a dark corner, where no daylight shone, and there they left him. "What does this mean?" thought the tree. "What am I to do here? I can hear nothing in a place like this." And he had time enough to think, for days and nights passed and no one came near him. And when at last somebody did come, it was only to put away large boxes in a corner. So the tree was completely hidden from sight, as if it had never existed. "It is winter now," thought the tree. "The ground is hard and covered with snow, so that people cannot plant me. I shall be sheltered here, I dare say, until spring comes. How thoughtful and kind everybody is to me. Still, I wish this place were not so dark, as well as lonely, with not even a little hare to look at. How pleasant it was out in the forest, while the snow lay on the ground, when the hare would run by, yes, and jump over me too, although I did not like it then. Oh, it is terrible lonely here." "Squeak, squeak," said a little mouse, creeping cautiously towards the tree. Then came another, and they both sniffed at the fir tree and crept between the branches. "Oh, it is very cold," said the little mouse, "or else we should be so comfortable here, shouldn't we, you old fir tree?" "I am not old," said the fir tree. "There are many who are older than I am." "Where do you come from, and what do you know?" asked the mice, who were full of curiosity. "Have you seen the most beautiful places in the world, and can you tell us all about them? And have you been in the storeroom, where cheeses lie on the shelf and hams hang from the ceiling? One can run about on tallow candles there, and go in thin and come out fat." "I know nothing of that place," said the fir tree, "but I know the wood where the sun shines and the birds sing." And then the tree told the little mice all about its youth. They had never heard such an account in their lives, and after they had listened to it attentively, they said, What a number of things you have seen! You must have been very happy." "Happy!" exclaimed the fir tree, and then, as he reflected upon what he had been telling them, he said, "Ah, yes, after all, those were happy days." But when he went on and related all about Christmas Eve, and how he had been dressed up with cakes and lights, the mice said, "How happy you must have been, you old fir tree." "I am not old at all," replied the tree. "I only came from the forest this winter. I am now checked in my growth." "What splendid stories you can relate," said the little mice. And the next night 4 other mice came with them to hear what the tree had to tell. The more he talked, the more he remembered. And then he thought to himself, "Those were happy days, but they may come again. Humpty Dumpty fell downstairs, and yet he married the princess. Perhaps I may marry a princess too." And the fir tree thought of the pretty little birch tree that grew in the forest, which was to him a real, beautiful princess. "Who is Humpty Dumpty?" asked the little mice. And then the tree related the whole story. He could remember every single word, and the little mice was so delighted with it that they were ready to jump to the top of the tree. The next night, a great many more mice made their appearance, and on Sunday 2 rats came with them. But they said it was not a pretty story at all, and the little mice were very sorry, for it made them also think less of it. "Do you know only one story?" asked the rats. "Only one," replied the fir tree. "I heard it on the happiest evening of my life, but I did not know I was so happy at the time." "We think it is a very miserable story," said the rats. "Don't you know any story about bacon or tallow in the storeroom?" "No," replied the tree. "Many thanks to you then," replied the rats, and they marched off. The little mice also kept away after this, and the tree sighed and said, "It was very pleasant when the merry little mice sat round me and listened while I talked. Now that is all past too. However, I shall consider myself happy when someone comes to take me out of this place." But would this ever happen? Yes. One morning people came to clear out the garret. The boxes were packed away, and the tree was pulled out of the corner and thrown roughly on the garret floor. Then the servant dragged it out upon the staircase where the daylight shone. "Now life is beginning again," said the tree, rejoicing in the sunshine and fresh air. Then it was carried downstairs and taken into the courtyard so quickly that it forgot to think of itself and could only look about. There was so much to be seen. The court was close to a garden where everything looked blooming. Fresh and fragrant roses hung over the little palings. The linden trees were in blossom, while the swallows flew here and there, crying, "Twit, twit, twit, my mate is coming." But it was not the fir tree they meant. "Now I shall live," cried the tree, joyfully spreading out its branches. But alas, they were all withered and yellow, and it lay in a corner amongst weeds and nettles. The star of gold paper still stuck in the top of the tree and glittered in the sunshine. In the same courtyard, 2 of the merry children were playing who had danced round the tree at Christmas and had been so happy. The youngest saw the gilded star and ran and pulled it off the tree. "Look what is sticking to the ugly old fir tree," said the child, treading on the branches till they crackled under his boots. And the tree saw all the fresh, bright flowers in the garden, and then looked at itself and wished it had remained in the dark corner of the garret. It thought of its fresh youth in the forest, of the merry Christmas evening, and of the little mice who had listened to the story of Humpty Dumpty. Past, past," said the old tree. "Oh, had I but enjoyed myself while I could have done so! But now it is too late." Then a lad came and chopped the tree into small pieces, till a large bundle lay in a heap on the ground. The pieces were placed in a fire under the copper, and they quickly blazed up brightly, while the tree sighed so deeply that each sigh was like a pistol shot. Then the children, who were at play, came and seated themselves in front of the fire, and looked at it and cried, "Pop, pop." But at each pop, which was a deep sigh, the tree was thinking of a summer day in the forest, and of Christmas evening, and of Humpty Dumpty. The only story it had ever heard or knew how to relate, till at last it was consumed. The boys still played in the garden, and the youngest wore the golden star on his breast, with which the tree had been adorned during the happiest evening of its existence. Now all was past. The tree's life was past, and the story also, for all stories must come to an end at last.